Chapter 321, 3 Epic 2 Stars. On the 10th day after the establishment of Wolf Head Mountain Base, the oppressive aura between heaven and earth grew even denser. Shadows of Jackal Man scouts were faintly visible in the surrounding area. Most of these scout spies from the Overlord power couldn't escape the keen eyes of the Battle Falcons, not to mention the Evil Spirits patrol teams equipped with Grudge radar. Yuan territory caught quite a few scouts, but they weren't able to extract much valuable information from their minds. This was within expectations. Yuan dispatched even more patrol squads and assassination squads to compete, hunt, and battle the scouts from the monster power in the surrounding forests and mountains. They undoubtedly held the upper hand. The Yuan troop prided itself on each member being elite, and what they excelled at the most was small-scale special operations. However, several Yuan forces exploring and expanding into the distance encountered ambushes by the enemy. Among them, the large exploratory team led by Bone 2 was encircled by enemies more than 200 kilometers north of their territory. This battle was exceedingly difficult. Bone 2 led hundreds of elite undead, including several skeleton lords and ghost leaders. This large team eradicated quite a few strong monster opponents along the way. Yet, they faced an even larger scale of ambushers, including 12 fourth-order boss-level enemies, 2 of whom were tribal chiefs whose combat power was not inferior to Bone 2, who had already stepped into the Fourth Order. Moreover, they were surrounded by over 1,000 elite monsters. The exploratory team led by Bone 2 was no match, and the majority of the elite undead were killed. Fortunately, Dead Bone had a backup plan. It had created a resonance link method between Grave Mountain Grave territory, and left several seeds of power within Bone 2's Grave territory to serve a crucial role at the right moment. In this battle, one seed of power shattered, turning into the river of Netherworld to crush the monster horde. After breaking and driving back the monster tide, another seed of power broke, drawing on the power of undead resurrection to revive all the fallen skeletons and ghosts. Dangerous, it's far too dangerous. Upon hearing this, Dead Bone immediately rushed to Bone 2's location to assist them. It was shaken. After all, there were only 9 seeds of power that it had left within Bone 2's Grave territory. Not that it didn't want to leave more, but that was the limit it could reserve. Its power was indeed limited, too weak. Yuan quickly adjusted strategy, ordering several exploratory teams to pull back. Now that Fang of the Jackal Wolf is probing and dispatching forces, it's not the right time for distant expansion. If we want to truly explore and expand, we need to truly defeat and crush an assault from Fang of the Jackal Wolf on the front line first, he said. Otherwise, they could only hunker down, making slow progress. If the enemy caught them at a critical weakness, they could potentially face a situation of 9 deaths and 1 survival. This encounter with the ambush was also somewhat related to Bone 2's reckless advance. Once the main force switched from exploring to defense patrol, Yuan territory always maintained an advantage in skirmishes. But this was nothing to be proud of. Hey? Wasn't I just messing around and slaughtering with the boss? Serio had a big question mark floating above its head. It had just killed several fourth-order bosses with the boss. Dead Bone had already gone to deal with other matters, so Bone 4, who inherited the steady spirit and Yuan will, explained, Fang of the Jackal Wolf has only been probing us, without really exerting full strength. Besides, what monster power lacks the least are high-order powerhouses. A few third-order and fourth-order dying might not even count as scratching the surface for them. Indeed, it wouldn't even count as scratching the surface. After all, the influence radius of Fang of the Jackal Wolf might consist of a dozen or dozens of territories as large as that of Stone Ridge Town. They subdued and integrated every monster camp and tribe in the region, forming one large tribe after another. These tribes then possessed countless strong beings. For Fang of the Jackal Wolf, even if all these large tribes were eradicated, it might not be a significant blow to them. However, Fang of the Jackal Wolf also had to be wary of other powers, and many of the large tribes were also very far from Wolf Head Mountain. Traveling long distances was not an easy task. Hence, Great Lord Shepherd took a detour and directly eradicated the Kobold tribe about 320 kilometers northeast of Wolf Head Mountain. When he destroyed the tribe, many wise kobolds had already run away, taking many materials and treasures with them. But due to this, the tribe's defense forces became very weak, and Yuan territory alone sent its main force of the Undead Legion to wipe out the tribe. Wisdom monsters can flee, but the corrupt structure's blood pond built within the tribe couldn't be relocated in a short time. Dead Bone laid a hand on them, purifying both blood ponds. Prompt, obtained an Excellence 2-star Remnant Soul Frost Giant. Prompt, obtained Miracle Blueprints Large Thunder Magnetic Coil Tower, blue, dot. Prompt, obtained Miracle Blueprints Cultivation Quiet Room, green, dot. Prompt, Large Thunder Magnetic Coil Tower, blue. Description, the ultimate upgraded building of the Thunder Magnetic Coil Tower, capable of gathering and outputting more powerful Thunderbolt attacks. Note, the Large Thunder Magnetic Coil Tower can increase single attack lethality through Thunder Magnetic Charging, with the longest charge duration of 10s. Note, the Large Thunder Magnetic Coil Tower can absorb Thunder Magnetic energy transmitted from the smaller Thunder Magnetic Coil Towers. Linking one more Thunder Magnetic Coil Tower, the building's single attack lethality increases by 30%, and the charge duration is extended by 1s. Without Bone 2's note, this Great Thunder Tower would have been just an ordinary superior grade defensive structure. If a lord only had 1 or 2 rare level Thunder Magnetic Coil Towers at home, the enhancement for the Great Thunder Magnetic Coil Tower wouldn't be significant. But what he owned were the permanent blueprints for the Thunder Magnetic Coil Tower. Thank you, Shen Ling Long. This Great Thunder Magnetic Coil Tower, even limited to 4th order, as long as it's used properly, can unleash unimaginable destructive power. Awesome! Huge praise! It came just in time. Yuan immediately went to the secret realm to purchase the main materials needed for building the Great Thunder Magnetic Tower. At the same time, he adjusted the construction plan for the smaller coil towers. His previous plan was to use these defensive structures to snipe high-order intelligent monsters. The Thunder Magnetic Coil Tower is indeed one of the strongest rare-level defensive structures when it comes to single-target destruction. A 4th-order boss with an insufficiently strong physique could potentially be seriously injured in one blow if it's careless. But now, these small coil towers had a greater value. Charging the Great Thunder Magnetic Coil Tower. This meant building them around the Great Thunder Magnetic Coil Tower. The Great Thunder Tower had to be within the firing range of the small coil towers to receive charging from them. The defense lines of Wolf Head Mountain were being constructed layer by layer, and some of the generals and elites who weren't scheduled for patrols or guard duty were also taking the time to enhance their power. The elites on patrol brought back enemies killed in combat in batches to the Soul Shrine. Thanks to the gifts of nature, after losing the Langxing platform, the growth in the number of soldiers of various systems in the Tianyuan territory was still rapid. The growth in the past few days even exceeded the period of large-scale purchases from Langxing. The total number of the undead system and human race system classes both exceeded 10,000. Now, the Tianyuan territory had more soldiers than territory citizens. Luckily, managing the troops was simple and easy. The skeletons stayed within the skeleton cemetery and could survive for a long time without the need to consume any soul sand. The militia needed to eat, so their maintenance costs were higher, but now Tianyuan territory did not lack ordinary food. It's just that one barracks after another was being constructed, taking up a lot of space. If the skeleton cemetery hadn't been upgraded, it wouldn't have been able to accommodate so many little skeletons. With the increase in the number of soldiers, the rate at which evolution points grew was significantly improved. Now, even though Yuan distributed his attention evenly, frequently evolving a batch of low to mid-level soldiers, on average, he could evolve an epic life every 2 days. The epics of Tianyuan territory were starting to surge. Your soldier Bone 29 bathed in the evolutionary miracle and advanced to Skeleton Lord. Your soldier Chen 8 bathed in the evolutionary miracle and advanced to Arrow of the Pole Star. Your soldier Winter Snow bathed in the evolutionary miracle and advanced to Lord of Frost. Your soldier. With the imminent war, Yuan prioritized evolving a batch of soldiers that could play a more significant role in the conflict. Among them, the number of War General level Skeleton Lords had grown to 21. The number of War General level Arrow of the Pole Star had also risen to 10. Even though 2 of them were not in the territory, the epic archers available for the defense of Wolf Head Mountain were still a full 8. It's just that these 8 Arrow of the Pole Star were of a lower level, only at the 3rd order Warlord level. They also didn't have talents as extraordinary as 17 in the spiritual domain, otherwise. If there were 8 17s defending the city, no, not even 8, just 4 17s would be enough to annihilate all the 4th order bosses that came attacking. In the defense battle, 17's deterrence against 3rd order and 4th order intellectuals might not be less than those in the legendary realm. Too bad, he didn't have a 17 right now. Arrow of the Pole Star was easy to come by, but 17 was hard to find. As the junior generals were born one after another, some of the Tianyuan powerhouses who had entered the rank of generals also advanced further during this period. The battle-proven veteran Liu Lu rightfully received the blessing of evolution and stepped into the rank of epic 2 stars. Hint: the hero Liu Lu has awakened the epic talent Sword of Will during the evolution process. Sword of Will, hero Liu Lu's willpower has greatly increased, and at the same time, his will has become sharper and more resilient. By actively activating his talent, Liu Lu can transform his own will into weapons such as knives, swords, spears, shields, etc. These weapons of will can cut through the will and souls of others and can also block soul assaults from enemies. More functions need to be explored on one's own. The scope of application for this talent is very broad, far beyond what is described on the panel. Liu Lu found that he could turn his willpower into an invisible sword of will, assaulting and cleaving through the hearts and souls of his enemies. It can be said to be quite powerful, especially against enemies below the legendary realm. Among the fourth order bosses, there are very few who can ignite the light of will. During the evolution and baptism, Liu Lu naturally had other gains, such as creating advanced skills like War Roar Mocking. Yuan glanced at it a few times and skipped over it once he had an idea of its effects. Hint: the soldier-type Tree Demon Granny has awakened the epic skill Forest Guardians during the evolution process. Forest Guardians. Description: Tree Demon Granny can transform any tree into a guardian that shelters the forest. The level of a Forest Guardian is one major order lower than that of the Lord Treeman, with the number of days they exist being equivalent to the order level of the Lord Treeman. Additional energy consumption can extend their lifespan and also enhance the level of the Treeman Guard. At the same time, the skills of the Lord Treeman can spread out using the Forest Guardian as a fulcrum. This is a skill related to war weapon manufacturing. Yuan had Tree Demon Granny tested out, and the consumption wasn't high. The Treeman Guards that were created were quite powerful, comparable to superior grade 1-star soldiers, and also had the advantage of being significantly larger in size. This was already quite powerful. The Wraith Sacred Mountain of Dead Bone is also capable of creating undead, and its creations can be enhanced to levels comparable to its own. But to create undead or enhance their levels, Dead Bone required additional material consumption. Once the undead perished in battle, it was a permanent loss. Of course, Dead Bone possessed a revival skill. The ability of the Wraith Sacred Mountain was a Krypton crystal skill, greatly consuming resources, whereas Tree Demon Granny's Forest Guardians were very environmentally friendly and created no waste. Truly eco-friendly Treeman Guardians. In these days, Tree Demon Granny had been continuously creating Forest Guardians, consuming many twisted ancient trees for this purpose. Yuan wanted to give 17 an evolutionary blessing, but unfortunately, 17 was not in the territory and could not be contacted at the moment. He also wanted to give Sophia a baptism of evolution. Sophia's contribution within Tianyuan territory was also among the top ranks, and her abilities were of great use in reconnaissance and alertness. Under the omniscient gaze of a murder of crows, enemies would have nowhere to hide. However, Sophia was also not present. Therefore, hint: the soldier-type Yuta has received an evolutionary baptism, and its talent Reaping What You Sow, incomplete, has been completed, advancing to Reaping What You Sow, complete. Reaping What You Sow. Explanation: effort will always be rewarded. Yuta can infinitely enhance his basic qualities through training, unconstrained by potential limits. However, while Yuta's potential has not been fully tapped, the benefits of training increase threefold. Explanation: when Yuta practices or uses skills, he can also continuously improve the proficiency of that skill until he breaks the limit, including epic skills. The higher the grade of the skill, the longer it takes to break through that limit. This is a down-to-earth but absolutely powerful talent. Before the talent was completed, Yuta was somewhat restricted. Now, the restrictor has been removed. Lately, Yuta has been unlocking physical shackles, and each time he can maintain it longer than the last, with each improvement being very significant, as if there were no limits. After using the skills, his recovery period is also shorter than before. Each time is shorter than the last. He is adapting. Yuta's training of skills seems to have a rapid improvement period, similar to basic training, before his potential has been fully tapped. Now, Yuan couldn't even imagine how strong Yuta could be in his full burst state. He could only intermittently load the incomplete version of Reaping What You Sow for his own training. His training effects were already very noticeable, still far from matching the complete version, not even reaching half of its effectiveness. The power of the Lord, it's becoming less and less impressive. Chapter 322, Different Directions of Evolution, Destiny Star Weaver. It's not that the Lord's authority is feeble, it's just that his subordinates are too powerful. While other lords were still figuring out how to increase the intimacy levels with their subordinates to maximize the effects of the Lord's power, Yuan's subordinates, their innate skills had already exceeded the upper limit of what the Lord's power could utilize. This Lord's power, thumbs down. On Wolf Head Mountain, hundreds of self-aware skeleton generals and big halberdiers, among others, were heaving and hoeing as they mined black iron and red copper ores and transported them into nearby fourth-order warehouses. Some troops were sourcing materials on the spot, cutting down trees and quarrying ordinary stone. These unranked materials were also shipped into storage warehouses in batches. Yuan didn't need to buy any materials from the outside, merely paying a little bit of soul sand was enough to construct one arrow tower after another. What a pity, arrow towers are single-target defense structures. If only I had the blueprint for an area of effect defense structure from Yongxing, that would be perfect, even ordinary grade cannons would do. He had already scouted that Fang of the Jackal Wolf was amassing a large force. It wasn't just the armies of the various large tribes under their command but also numerous wild monsters summoned through special means. This Lord of Fang of the Jackal Wolf, while very strong, was also exceedingly cautious. They were fully leveraging their advantage, bringing into play the numerical superiority of the monster power. After all, legendary beings are not invincible. But how will they stop a legendary realm monster, along with countless monster tides and the vitality force? Inside the Feet Herman country, several elderly feathermen sighed. An old general who had dealt with monster power for over a century even adopted a pessimistic view. Even without a legendary monster leading them, such a massive monster tide isn't something our vitality force can withstand head-on. I'm not being overly pessimistic. Put yourself in our shoes. Without relying on the secret realm and only depending on the slight geographical advantage of Wolf Head Mountain, could we stop the monster tide? We couldn't. What he didn't say was that the Queen herself couldn't stop it either. Even if the Queen could kill 10, 20, 30 fourth-order boss-level monsters, it still wouldn't shake the monster tide. How many monsters could she kill after exhausting all her strength? If there were no legendary realm monsters present, their Queen could come and go as she pleased, but if she wanted to hold her ground, I'm afraid even the legendary being would be exhausted to death. In the meeting room, there were also members of the attack faction among the feathermen present. They wanted to object, but upon reviewing the intelligence reports from the outside, they found themselves unable to find any reason to contradict after their throats bobbed for a long while. There are too many monsters. Is this the real outside world? Some young feathermen murmured. They had seen the images. Monsters covered the mountainside, thundering through the forests, so vast that the end of the monster tide seemed invisible, and even the creatures flying in the sky blanketed the air, forming dark clouds drifting toward the distance. These young feathermen, in their 20s and 30s, who had never left home, had never witnessed such a scene. For a moment, they were at a loss for words. Their longing for the outside world, their ambition to reclaim their ancestral glory, were crushed bit by bit by this cruel reality. What about the human territories? Are they still preparing for war? Indeed, as allies, providing that human lord with some intelligence is the extent of what we're capable of. Yet even with this information, the human lords are still indifferent. It seems they really intend to face the monster overlord head-on in the Wolf Head Mountain region. What are they thinking? When their Feet Herman country had once confronted Fang of the Jackal Wolf head-on, they merely sought to ambush and kill the strong ones among the monster forces. Who would actively seek to face the monster tide? Are they out of their minds? The Feet Herman country indeed has some deep reserves, there are several monsters within that we haven't discovered yet. After all, they were far away, and the wilderness was vast and boundless. In the Combat Command Center, Yuan was arranging tactics, integrating intelligence provided by the Feet Herman country. He truly lacked area of effect defense structures, but that didn't mean he was without means to counter the monster waves. Rather, every single one of Tianyuan territory's sitting generals had a wealth of experience in repelling monster tides. From the Lord Trial to the Red Fog Disaster Moon, they had fought countless city defenses. Of course, this defense would be somewhat different from the previous ones. For area attacks, many of Tianyuan's generals possess crucial abilities with extensive coverage, and also defensive weapons like the Thunder Flame Cannon. Not only that. At the base of the mountain, Tree Demon Granny was continuously transforming and creating forest guardians. Other tree demons were also gathering Earth's force from all directions, preparing for the battle. At the top of the mountain, 4 snow country fortresses were lined up in an arc along the gentle slope side of Wolf Head Mountain, where one amplification core and defense weapon after another were being successively constructed. Winter Snow Maiden excels in large area damage and is among the top of high-order magic troop types. And now, his Snow Maiden Corps was steadily growing and had become the backbone of the territory. The greatest advantage of his Tianyuan territory was the presence of highly exceptional generals. Many fourth-order strongmen had limited effectiveness in the face of the monster tide, but Tianyuan's generals were different. The epic young general Fearless War Commander and the fearless giant mountain god ranking could stand up to, even rout, the enemy's large-scale war machines. The epic junior commander Lord Treeman can sustain combat with combat, turning enemies into his own sustenance, forming a temporary perpetual motion machine mode and not fearing energy consumption at all. Whether against groups or individuals, the powerhouse of the Tianyuan territory is quite sufficient. Of course, these alone are not enough to face the monster tide. Lord Shepherd has prepared several trump cards, ready to be played depending on the situation. He also has General Duo Lai to fall back on. Legendary Realm can't stop such a monster tide? But the legendary realm that cannot achieve this definitely does not include Duo Lai. Do you understand the value of Duo Lai's ability to handcraft suns? However, Mu Yuan wouldn't let Duo Lai take action prematurely unless absolutely necessary. Duo Lai intervening against ordinary monsters would also mean falling into a disadvantageous position, offering more opportunities to the formidable enemies of the legendary realm. The task of dealing with and slaughtering legendary realm monsters is Duo Lai's mission. Mu Yuan pondered. He also had to consider how to cope if the worst-case scenario were to happen. Super legendary powerhouse Duo Lai is not his greatest trump card. His trump card is still the Staff of Divine Right. Last time, the 9-headed roaring thunder flame dragon was able to kill a legendary in one strike. Regardless of whether the Jackal Man legend was careless or unprepared, the strength of this grand offensive technique has certainly been affirmed. The foundational techniques of the 9-headed roaring thunder flame dragon originated from Duo Lai. After Duo Lai advanced to legendary, Mu Yuan and Ilo immediately set to work, upgrading this technique. They spent a full 8 days creating the first grand legendary technique powered by Duo Lai's source of strength. Its power would surpass that of the previous generation by 100 to 1,000 times. Of course, the time and energy required to create a technique also grew by several hundred times. After Duo Lai first crafted the technique, the Staff of Divine Right was able to use it as a foundation to replicate and manufacture more. However, the entire manufacturing process took a full 3 days and nights, with energy consumption exceeding the daily output limit of the energy well. It was all worth it. Looking inside the 9-turn furnace at the golden-purple thunder flame dragon roaring, Mu Yuan wore a relieved smile. The enemy is still marching and gathering. It's estimated that it will take another 2 or 3 days before they reach the base of Wolf Head Mountain. For the fang of the Jackal Wolf, being a few days early or late made no difference. But for Tianyuan territory, an extra day meant a tad more certainty. Mu Yuan found Ilo, who was diligently at work. Evolve, me. At this time, shouldn't the combatants be given the baptism of evolution first? She wasn't opposed to evolving, having witnessed the abundance of talent in Tianyuan and no longer seeking to become the strongest in Tianyuan, her urgency for evolution had diminished. She was just a clerical staff, after all. Of course, she still craved power. Who wouldn't want to evolve? For the combatants, many who should evolve have already done so, and moreover. First, Ilo's contributions to the territory were sufficient to place her among the top 3, or even top 2. It wouldn't be appropriate to evolve others and not her. Second, many elites were not high enough in rank, even if they were given the baptism of evolution now, they couldn't exert too much strength. Third, Tianyuan territory had many unmatched warriors but few with specialized functions. And Ilo was a highly versatile all-rounder. Her epic 2 stars awakened ability Starry Eyes already possessed tracking, long-distance observation, and insight capabilities. If Ilo evolved again, what divine technique would she awaken? Mu Yuan felt it was worth taking the gamble. Ilo had many abilities that were supportive miracles, and as the 3rd legendary seed, increasing her strength was undoubtedly correct. I'm not saying I don't want to evolve. But her new stage of body modification plans was not yet complete. She had been so busy lately that she hadn't had any time for her private projects. She hadn't expected the Lord to offer her evolution so soon. Logically speaking, the higher the level of life, the more difficult it is to advance, but she felt that the intervals between her baptisms had not been extended. What was going on? In the blink of an eye, she was about to step into the epic 3 stars realm. Thinking of this, Ilo was somewhat dazed. She had only been in Tianyuan territory for a few months. When she first applied for a job at Tianyuan, she never imagined such a dreamy day would come. Having evolved 2 epic 3 stars and many epic sub-commanders, Yuan was quite experienced in the path of evolution. Material preparations, ritual site arrangements, activation of the Ice Heart Lotus platform, the domain interferer powering on. The end-to-end process was quickly initiated. Then came the final step. The massive Evo power surged out, infusing into Ilo, who quickly transformed into a beam of light. Yuan played with the imaging equipment, meanwhile waiting for the notification sound to ring. Notification: your hero Ilo is bathing in miraculous light, evolving. Normally, after several hundred seconds, he would hear the notification that evolution was complete and a new ability had awakened. But, just the next second. Please select the evolution path for your hero Ilo. Stars Apostle. Destiny Star Weaver. Ilo's Epic 1 star and Epic 2 star ranks were Guardian of Stars, and at her Excellence 3 stars stage, her rank was Star Queen. Yuan originally thought that her rank would not change in the Epic stage, but unexpectedly, not only did it change, but there were also different evolutionary paths to choose from. What's going on here? The evolutionary rituals he had presided over numbered in the thousands, if not tens of thousands. He had never encountered such a situation before. Beings like Rakshasa, Hongyi, or even the initial duo Lai, they were directly evolved into hidden classes, but a choice had never appeared. Could it be, both evolutionary paths available to Ilo are equally potent? Stars Apostle, Destiny Star Weaver. Yuan murmured. He couldn't access more information, he only vaguely understood that he needed to make a decision soon, otherwise, delaying too long would cause the Evo power to dissipate. Which one to choose? Apostle. Weaver. Yuan gazed at Ilo, who had transformed into light, and within his vision he could faintly see a river formed by the Evo power, steadily flowing. After a long moment. Destiny Star Weaver. A dazzling pillar of light then shot up into the heavens. It was still daytime, but the sky above the Tianyuan territory had turned to night, with the night sky where stars sparkled and traced arcs of light. Those seemed to be the arcs of destiny. A while later, no further incidents occurred. The extreme radiance that enveloped Ilo began to slowly dissipate. Notification: your hero Ilo has bathed in an evolutionary miracle, transforming into an epic 3 stars life form Destiny Star Weaver, awakening the talent Destiny Star Weaving. Destiny Star Weaving: Ilo can observe the stars to discern changes in destiny and fortune. When she uses star-related techniques and skills, she can obtain more accurate answers. When this talent is actively activated, Ilo can influence an individual's/group's destiny by intervening with the destiny stars. The strength of the influence is inversely proportional to the target's level and willpower. During this evolution, Ilo also awakened some high-level skills. Yuan glanced over a few but focused on the destiny star weaving talent. The description of the talent was mystifying, and Ilo was still immersed in enlightenment, not yet awakened, so Yuan took the opportunity to use it himself. He activated the Lord's power, entering freeloading mode. Destiny Star Weaving, Initiate. Yuan got to enjoy this talent before Ilo, though what he freeloaded was only the youth version. Upon talent initiation, an indescribable charm enveloped him. After a while, he comprehended it. Ilo opened her eyes. Under the same skill frequency, Yuan faintly saw threads connected to the destiny stars in the azure sky. At the same time, in the northwest of the Tianyuan territory, about 100 kilometers away, a jackal man expert in stealth and reconnaissance, a fourth-order strongman, was making his way through dense forests. Unlike other scouts, he hailed from the very heart of the fang of the jackal wolf. His rank was as high as Excellence 3 stars, and he possessed several high-level stealth and covert abilities. Seeming to have discovered a clue, he stealthily made his way in a certain direction. Neither the Tai Ching birds flying overhead, the evil spirits hiding in the woodlands, nor the patrolling undead squads could detect this figure. If he continued in this direction and managed to evade all the patrol squads, he might very well discover the true location of the Tianyuan territory. Suddenly, the jackal man strongman crouched down, touching the ground. With a new clue spotted, he murmured, "Wrong, wrong, the trail leads this way." He turned and sped off to the southwest. Perhaps eager to claim full credit, or perhaps anxious from the lack of new clues despite relentless pursuit, he became gradually reckless, losing his usual caution. Until, groggily, he stumbled into an ambush set by a powerful patrol squad. Bone 2, so this is nature's gift, hey. Chapter 323, The Tide Has Come. The effects of destiny star weaving are profoundly mysterious, not to mention that outsiders can't comprehend it. Even if Ilo herself were to describe and explain, it would be very hard for others to understand. Yuan understood. At this time, he was called Little Ilo, able to faintly perceive the trajectory of destiny stars and threads of fate. He was very clear about what was happening. Ilo, by observing the stars, had found destiny threads related to Tianyuan territory and monster activities. From these, she had locked onto her target within the field of destiny star weaving. By influencing a certain destiny star, she then interfered with the fate of a jackal man, causing their actions to deviate ever so slightly, and then she continuously expanded this deviation. Perhaps the jackal man scout, until beheaded by Bone 2 in the dense forest, was regretting his carelessness and bringing incorrect intelligence to Fang of the jackal wolf. This use of destiny star weaving is terrifying indeed. Of course, the limitations of this talent were also significant, and Yuan noticed them quickly. Firstly, the reason Ilo was able to find and subsequently influence this jackal man is because of the relevance between the scout and Tianyuan territory. The greater the relevance, the easier it is for her to weave destiny. Conversely, without any connection, it would be incredibly difficult for Ilo to interfere, and she might not even know where to begin, Yuan deduced. Secondly, the object of interference can't be too powerful. Interfering with a 4-order peak jackal man, such as this one, is already the limit of what she can do, and it cost her a lot. Such a jackal man, in direct combat, wouldn't last 3 moves under Ilo's hands. The talent of destiny star weaving provided a negligible boost to Ilo's combat power. But in other areas, its effect was absolutely potent. Before, we weren't clear on many of the monster wave's intelligence, and we had to rely on the Feet Herman Kingdom. The monster routes provided by the Feet Herman Kingdom were not absolutely reliable. After all, the wilderness is vast, and they have been in seclusion for many years. Even the Feet Herman Kingdom had trouble locating all the monster armies, let alone Tianyuan territory. They could only detect the approaching monster tide when it reached nearby areas, through various patrol teams and scouts. But now, with Ilo's destiny star weaving, they could retroactively deduce the locations of the monster tides and lock them down one by one. This tracking method was far superior to the overhead views of battle falcons or the detection of black crows. This is attack. Destiny star weaving could also be hugely beneficial in defense, just like what had happened a moment ago. After all, unlike Feet Herman Valley, Tianyuan territory couldn't hide inside a different space. Despite multiple layers of concealment, there was still a small chance of exposure. Now, with destiny star weaving, they could continuously reduce that small probability, pressing it down to almost 0. This can be done, right? The idea was brilliant, but whether it could be achieved depended on Master Ilo. Even though Ilo was a 007 chosen worker princess who could do the work of dozens, she couldn't possibly maintain star observation forever. It was too exhausting, and she wouldn't be able to handle it even if she drained herself dry. Yuan was well aware of this. They had to be clever. Of course. Ilo asserted resolutely. Now no longer a military general but a mere civil officer, she aimed to perform every possible duty of a civil officer to the extreme. Bodily enhancement, alchemy, star observation, divination, ritual track arrangement, she had to be able to do them and to do them perfectly. Without that level of dedication, how could she maintain her position as the Lord's right hand? I can set up a possibility defense system using destiny star weaving. In this way, as soon as there's a possibility of our territory being discovered by monster scouts, the system will alert us. Then, all we need to do is this and that. She mentioned many technical terms. If a certain general were here, he would probably be dizzy with confusion, but the erudite Lord Shepherd naturally understood, grasping almost 90% of it. He was very satisfied. As expected from his all-around talent. After Ilo evolved, Yuan and she quickly deduced the general location of the monster armies. There were currently a total of 12 monster armies. They were slowly joining forces and charging straight towards Wolf Head Mountain. Their vast numbers were alarming. The scope of Fang of the Jackal Wolf's territory seems exceptionally large. The good news was that Fang of the Jackal Wolf's headquarters was still quite far from their position. It's as if their location was on the borders of 2 kingdoms, on the fringes, far from the core areas. The bad news was that with a single command, Fang of the Jackal Wolf could mobilize thousands of troops. Long marches weren't easy for monsters, either. Through Jun's vision, Yuan saw that during the course of their travel, monsters would occasionally stray from the tide, howling as they pounced into the surrounding forests and disappeared. Additionally, some monsters would start fighting while on the move, a pair wrestling and biting each other, with blood splattering everywhere. After all, the majority of monsters lacked intelligence and order. Fang of the Jackal Wolf could control and command monsters through special means, but it was difficult to maintain this control for long. However, as the tide surged, high-rank Jackal Wolves pulled more and more monsters from various places. The monster tide was moving southward, some dispersed, others joined, with its overall size not diminishing. Compared to monsters, it was much more difficult for vitality forces to undertake long marches. By more than 100-fold. Even if a lord could assemble an army of 100,000, they would encounter one monster tide after another during the march, potentially failing to maintain cohesion within a few hundred miles and collapsing in disarray. In fact, when the elite force of the pioneer group ventured deep into the wilderness, they seldom brought a large army with them. It could be said that they relied on the Lord Seal to recruit a group of elites. The larger the expedition team, the more likely they were to attract a monster tide. There are too many monsters. Now that we've discovered their exact location, why not wear them down first? Yuan came into the Staff of Divine Right, opening up the stored list of techniques. He had a total of 80 slots for techniques. Night Illusory Curtain reserved 1, 20,000 Prism Large Reflection stored 2, 10 times 2, the legendary 9-headed Roaring Thunder Flame Dragon also had 2 stored, 10 times 2. He was originally about to create a third Thunder Flame Dragon technique, but after thinking it over, he cancelled the creation and decided to take matters into his own hands. Using his own spells as the foundation, he spent 2.5 hours to create and merge a large-scale magic that took up 10 technique slots. Firestorm Descending from Heaven. The destructive limit of this large-scale magic was a lot less than that of the previous generation's Thunder Flame Dragon. After all, Yuan had created it hastily. However, it also had its advantages, with a significantly wider area of effect. Next, he swiftly maneuvered the miracle building that was the Staff of Divine Right with the authority of a lord. Select coordinates, XXX, YYY, use the super long distance Eye of Heaven. A rampaging monster tide promptly appeared within the observational range of the Eye of Heaven. In this range, the Eye of Heaven did not detect any high-energy reactions from the legendary realm. Yuan was not surprised by this. He continued his operation. Drib. Starting a super long-distance strike, use the large-scale magic Firestorm Descending from Heaven on that area. Yes. In an instant, hundreds to thousands of kilometers away from Tianyuan territory, the sky suddenly turned red-hot, and the clouds seemed to be on fire. Clusters of intense orange-red heavenly fire, like mini meteors, fell from the azure sky, striking the ground. What is that? Common monsters were still on the run, but some high-rank jackal wolves hidden within the monster tide, who played the roles of guides and commanders, nearly popped their eyes out. Their awareness and instincts were screaming at them, danger, great danger. Run! The jackal wolves, along with other wisdom monsters who were mostly driven by the instinct to survive, immediately abandoned the monster tide and scattered in all directions. But they quickly realized that the heavenly fire was falling too fast, and its coverage was incredibly vast. Everywhere they looked, there were blazing orange flames. They couldn't escape the range enshrouded by the heavenly fire. Boom! Boom! Boom times 10086. The ground shook as the heavenly fire burst forth, wave after wave of orange fire engulfing the land and sky, swallowing group after group of roaring monsters. This was an extreme high-temperature heavenly fire that shattered rocks and then melted them. The high-order intelligent monsters within the monster tide kept running, dodging the heavenly fire falling from the sky, and slashing through the ferocious flames before them. Though Firestorm Descending from Heaven was a large-scale magic that primarily targeted an extremely large area, its burst strength at a single point was somewhat lacking and might not necessarily kill a fourth-order strongman. However, even with various shortcomings of Firestorm Descending from Heaven, when the orange flames ceased to fall from the sky and the red clouds gradually dissipated, most of the monsters beneath had perished, nearly 9 out of 10. Many a wise wolfman failed to escape. The might of the heavenly flame was so fierce. With a single strike, it annihilated the largest contingent of the southward moving monster tide. This is the trump card of the Vitality Force, a super magic technique that can be launched across vast spatial distances. Not long ago, Gu perished under a similar technique. Hundreds of kilometers away, a jackal man sage adorned with a long necklace made of bones, was witnessing from afar thanks to a certain ability. However, the destructive power of this super magic technique is a notch lower than the one that killed Gu. It shows that within the hands of the Vitality Force, this kind of super magic technique really is a dwindling asset, to be used sparingly. They had dealt with many surviving Vitality Forces and had hands-on experience in annihilating quite a few. How could they not understand these beings that can only rely on the remnants of their ancestors to survive? But we must be cautious, the Vitality Force still possesses that kind of 9 dragon super techniques. No, since the Vitality Force dares to confront us directly, they most likely still have a foundation to deal with us. Another legendary strongman, also the commander this time, the King of Black Wings, spoke. He was a jackal man with fur entirely black, and even more, he had a pair of giant black wings on his back. Merely standing there, he emanated an ominous aura. The third legendary strongman took over the conversation, but that fool Guya dying was also because he was careless, arrogant, and foolish. Now that we are concealing our tracks, the Vitality Force has no chance of locking onto us, plus, we also have the special treasure, the spatial urn, a treasure obtained from an ancient civilization that has perished. It's really useful, as long as we deploy the spatial urn, we can form a space isolated from the outside world and very stable. Even if we are careless, with the spatial urn in hand, the 9 dragons techniques can't harm us. Yes, even if some attacks can tear through space, they absolutely cannot tear open the stable barrier formed by the spatial urn, unless it's a power specifically targeting space. But space abilities, how rare they are. Objects with spatial power are few and far between. The 4th legendary realm strongman spoke out. It seemed others remained silent. But whether they spoke or not, nobody cared about the monster tide that perished under the falling sky inferno. Even if within the tide there were some high-ranked jackal wolves that could be considered their offspring, in the eyes of the legends, they were no different from cannon fodder. Cannon fodder that could probe some of the tactics of the Vitality Force was worth it. Yuan only sent out 1 falling sky inferno. This technique was not difficult to create, but ultra-long distance projection required the reliance on the Eye of Heaven, and the Eye of Heaven had limited uses. However, the strategic significance of the 1 falling sky inferno was high, far beyond the annihilation of a single monster tide. After the inferno was launched, the fang of the jackal wolf began to scatter the charging monster tide to prevent being wiped out in one fell swoop again. As the monster tide dispersed, the number of monsters that the falling sky inferno could kill in one go indeed greatly decreased, but many monsters were thereby scattered into the surrounding mountains and forests. As they headed south, the scale of the monster tide inevitably began to shrink slowly. Is this the strategy of the human lords? I must say, their strategy is correct. That sort of means that can annihilate tens of thousands of monsters in the blink of an eye is indeed frightening, but the scale of the monster tide is even more terrifying. They didn't feel much during their previous investigations, but at this moment, as they stood on the mountain and overlooked the surging tide, they realized how minuscule they and their forces were. Even if the number of strong men in their Feet Herman nation were to multiply by 10, they would still be insignificant in front of this black tide. A Feet Herman strongman let out a sigh. In another place, a huge figure wearing a concealing pearl, looked out from a distance. Though his form was massive, his presence was extremely faint. His eyes shone brightly with golden light, allowing him to see dozens of kilometers away at a glance. This was a giant. A vitality giant. He watched the rolling monster tide moving forward in the distance, and after a long time, he finally murmured softly. King, not choosing to confront the monster overlord head-on is not due to cowardice, this is the right choice. In yet another place, a figure hidden among the treetops, with pointed ears, looked out and also heaved a deep sigh. The commotion of the fang of the jackal wolf commanding 10,000 troops was huge, and some of the hidden, secluded vitality forces in nearby areas were awoken, forcing their attention to this battle. On Wolf Head Mountain, one after another commander of the Tianyuan territory arrived. Atop a certain mountain peak, Duo Lai sat cross-legged, with a space-tearing seal materialized in each hand. Behind him, a dark spatial vortex slowly spun, and a giant serpent that bit its own tail coiled back and forth in midair. With his mouth slightly open, he swallowed the energy of the heavens and the earth. Having stepped into the legendary realm for more than 10 days, Duo Lai not only mastered proficient space abilities but also upgraded his commonly used techniques one by one. All was ready, just waiting for General Duo Lai's grand slaughter. Mu Yuan looked out beyond the mountain. The sky gradually darkened, and the black tide was already rushing forth. Chapter 324, The Undead Scourge, Wave vs Wave. Drip, drip, drop. Large raindrops pattered down, gradually wetting the black stone slabs. Mu Yuan stood atop the city wall, facing the chilling wind teeming with murderous intent. The wind carried the raindrops, which lashed against his face. In the distant mountains and forests, clouds of dust rose, and one could vaguely see monsters with ferocious visages charging forward. At the edge of the horizon, under thick clouds, myriad winged beasts fluttered their wings, forming another layer of dark clouds. The rain became more intense, its sound intermingling with thunder and the thundering noise of monsters galloping, like the prelude to a battle. Grim and daunting. The momentum of the monsters' charge slowed, they were not like their kin during the red fog disaster moon, mindlessly surging wave after wave. They were being controlled. The hidden manipulators were the legends of the Fang of the Jackal Wolf. The Fang of the Jackal Wolf was waiting for all the monster tides to converge before pressing forward en masse. This was sharply different from the red fog disaster moon. During the red fog disaster moon, the Tianyuan territory had eradicated an enormous number of monsters, but that was the result of over a month's worth of battle. If one were to measure by a mere defense battle, the tide they faced now far surpassed that of the red fog disaster moon period. It was as if several waves, a dozen waves of monster tides, had converged into one, bringing a short-term pressure multiple times greater. Moreover, within this wave, there lurked high-order monsters far surpassing those of the red fog disaster moon period. Mu Yuan opened the eye of heaven and surveyed from above. Red dots representing monsters first appeared at the northern end of the observation area, then spread outwards bit by bit, like a spreading tide of red water. They bypassed the center's Wolf Head Mountain, squeezing from both sides. Time slowly elapsed, and the grim atmosphere permeating heaven and earth grew thicker, the air becoming viscous and heavy, making it hard for people to breathe. The rain continued to fall, silently quelling everything. In the sky, a bird had hidden its form so well that even raindrops falling on it could not reveal its contours, watching over the earth with its sharp eyes. Through its gaze, the sky, the land, and the rivers were all swirling with groups upon groups, waves upon waves of monsters. The forests were occupied by them. The mountains were occupied by them. The plains teemed with countless figures. Its eyes schemed over mountains and land, stretching to the horizon, which was not the end of the black tide. The same scene unfolded in the eyes of an elf with pointed ears. Crouching on a thick tree branch, her clothing of dark green armor was already soaked, with rainwater flowing down her collarbone. As a top intelligence agent of the vitality force called Natural Garden, Taili had never seen such a grand spectacle before. She gazed in awe, her mouth slightly open, her throat moving silently for a long while. Goodness gracious! Even with a not insignificant level of education, at that moment, she did not know what words to use to express her feelings. Not far from her, there towered a giant more than 20 meters tall. The giant stood there with a very faint presence, resembling nothing more than an ordinary rock. The giant hailed from the vitality force called Giant Stone Ridge. In the past 100 or so years, Giant Stone Ridge and Natural Garden had formed an alliance to jointly combat the colossus that was the Fang of the Jackal Wolf. To say they were combating it was to somewhat exaggerate. They engaged in some material trades, intelligence exchanges, and while hiding their presence and avoiding the hunts of the monster overlords like the Fang of the Jackal Wolf, they sneaked around exploring, scavenging marginal resources, and quietly accumulating power. Yet, just escaping the hunting of a monster overlord like the Jackal Man was difficult enough, let alone accumulating power. There were times when their overall strength regressed instead of advancing. The giant too was silent for a long while before he spoke through the elf's telepathic link. Our Giant Stone Ridge had also thought about stepping into the outside world, taking over a rich treasure of a place, but one might take over the land, but surviving to keep it was another matter. He said in his deep, resonant voice, however, which vitality force occupying Wolf Head Mountain is in possession now. Vitality forces could only struggle to stay alive under the oppression of the overlords, but many were still tenacious. Most of the forces had a long heritage, living in seclusion and avoiding the world. Even Giant Stone Ridge and Natural Garden could not be sure how many surviving forces existed in this area. However, the stronger surviving forces would often step into the outside world to search for resources and seek opportunities, only the weaker ones were forced to live completely secluded lives. And in this area, they, Giant Stone Ridge and Natural Garden, were among the rare few vitality forces capable of contending with monster overlords. Could it be Dragon Man Valley? I remember that Dragon Man Valley's overall strength was a notch higher than ours at Giant Stone Ridge. They were devising some secret weapon a few decades ago. If Dragon Man Valley has made a major breakthrough in strength, considering how proud those Dragon Men are, it wouldn't surprise me if they decided to openly oppose the fang of the Jackal Wolf. The giant mused. No, Elf Taily shook her head. Dragon Man Valley was destroyed 21 years ago. Proud as they were, they attempted to confront both the fang of the Jackal Wolf and Blood Snake Encase at once, and were quashed before they even caused a ripple. The giant was taken aback. After all, Giant Stone Ridge was also in a semi-isolated state, and the giants were not good at scouting, so they were even unaware of the fall of Dragon Man Valley. Perhaps Dragon Man Valley was overrun too swiftly for the news to spread. Could it be Feet Herman Nation? They also are a formidable force, but they seem to have rarely ventured into the outer world in recent years. The giant continued in a booming voice. The Feet Herman Nation may lack the ability or, rather, the courage. Ever since their great defeat at the hands of the fang of the Jackal Wolf decades ago, they've virtually secluded themselves from the world, not daring even to step out and explore, let alone seize resources. Where would they find the courage to confront the fang of the Jackal Wolf head-on? Of course, whichever power this might be, they probably didn't expect the monster overlord's call to be so terrifyingly compelling. Without the need for legends to take action, the black tide is enough to drown everything. At this point, both fell silent. As they stood in the distance, gazing ahead, they felt an oppressive weight overcoming them, a shiver running through their bodies. The force amidst the surrounding monster tide, facing the endless creatures head-on, how frightened they must feel. Atop Wolf Head Mountain, soldiers braced themselves, the fighting spirit beneath their helmets growing uncontrollably fierce. Wasn't it just a monster tide? They were fighting the tide. Woo 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 woo. The Jackal Man leaders sounded the horns, the sounds echoing one after another, spreading in all directions. The next moment, the monsters that had hung their heads lifted them, drool dripping from their mouths, as they howled towards the heavens. Roar! Roar roar! Awoo! They surged forth, the black tide that had been still for a while, now rolling forward again. Before long, the monsters at the forefront of the tide entered the firing range of Wolf Head Mountain Fortress. The thunder flame cannons set up at high vantage points on the fortress and peaks of the mountain fired rapidly. There were also a few thunder fire cannons at rare level, costly war machines that Yuan had procured, which also fired with booming blasts. In the blink of an eye, monsters were pierced by massive arrows, blown to smithereens. Qingshuang and Hanshuang stood atop fortresses in the snow country, their snowy white hair fluttering. They had built their own snow country fortresses within Tianyuan territory, but that didn't impede them from harnessing the power of other fortresses. They were among the strongest in the Snow Girl system of troops, having cultivated to the middle of third order. Now, standing atop the snow country forts, they could faintly resonate with the surrounding heaven and earth. They stretched out their hands, and icy power surged forth violently. Snowflakes fell from the sky, congregating to form an overwhelming cold tide, a high-level ability called Cold Tide Funeral, strengthened by the snow country fortress as though it was a large-scale magic. The cold tide buried masses of monsters. On the snow country fortresses, ice crystal towers were also firing ice cones with whooshing sounds. This power seems to be very adept at setting up fortress defenses, their lines are quite strong. However, there are simply too many monsters, the giant sighed. The elf nodded. Despite the large number of monsters killed by the various defensive weapons and structures, they couldn't stop the advancing tide. At the current rate, in a few hundred seconds, throngs of monsters would be storming the fortress. By then, could the few hundred to 1,000 elites on the walls use their heads to block the surging tide? Impossible. What's more, within the tide, not all were mindless creatures that charged forward on instinct alone. In the skies, a group of over 2,000 to 3,000 flying monsters, all above second-order elite level, were being commanded at high speed. As long as these flying monsters breached the fortress and slightly disrupted the defenders' formation, they would fulfill the commander's objective of the fang of the Jackal Wolf. A bit further away, over 100 rare 3-star level monsters, Evil Eyes, were being gathered by a Jackal Man priest. The priest held a relic, chanting bizarre incantations. Suddenly, a crimson mist flew out, enshrouding the Evil Eyes. Their eyeballs swelled even larger, becoming engorged with scarlet as they accumulated power, emitting thick beams of sinister light. With flying monsters from the west and evil eye beams from the east, the monster overlord had come fully prepared. In the long-range bombardment, the thunder flame cannons, arrow towers, and other defensive installations were easily destroyed. Even if their casualty ratio against the monsters was 1 to 10, 1 to 20, or even 1 to 100, they would be at a disadvantage. Yuan, of course, had also come prepared. Large-scale magic thousand prism large reflection, activated. An invisible great force channeled through the staff of divine right, descending over the airspace of Wolfhead Mountain Fortress. In an instant, a huge shield constructed of countless hexagonal blue mirrors, like a giant bowl, was inverted over Wolfhead Mountain Fortress. The evil eye beams coming from the east struck the pale blue screen, causing only slight ripples before being deflected, transforming into myriad scattered beams that rained down on the surging monster tide. For a time, dust billowed and the earth quaked. The flying monsters from the west were also blocked outside the thousand prism barrier, their various energy and physical attacks unable to penetrate this large-scale magic. Meanwhile, the protected Tianyuan defenders could effortlessly shoot through and kill the monsters. This was the principle of one-way defense of an enchantment. The thousand prism large reflection, after all, was a super spell created through the talent of Daifu, combined with the intelligence of Yuan and Ilo. It was not only powerful but also exquisitely profound. Compared to a real enchantment, its only flaw was that it couldn't be sustained indefinitely. In normal circumstances, it could last 2.5 hours, but the more frequent and powerful the external attacks on it, the shorter the duration of the spell. And because it was a one-use spell, they couldn't replenish it by expending energy. Reminder, a new thousand prism large reflection is being manufactured. What a powerful technique! Elf Taili and Giant Jiang'er, being seasoned 4th Order strongmen, recognized the extraordinary nature of this magic barrier at a glance. This technique could probably even block a legendary realm being for some time. It seems this vitality force is truly laying all its cards on the table, ready to fight to the death. However, as powerful as this technique is, it's not very effective against a large tidal wave of attackers. It could block legends, but not the tide, not even for a moment. After all, when the tide rolls in, with thousands upon thousands of attacks raining down, it would drain the entire barrier more than 1 or 2 legends would. Yuan, being half an expert, naturally understood this. In his field of vision, monsters with blood-red eyes and fierce faces were closing in. Even more visible red mist began to drift between heaven and earth, growing increasingly ominous. It might take a few hundred more seconds for the monster tide to surge up the mountain and reach the pale blue barrier, but within a little over 100 seconds they could reach the foot of Wolfhead Mountain. There lay Tianyuan territory's first line of defense. The Treeman defense line. At this moment, the forest was reviving, ancient trees, thick and robust, were coming to life, faces emerged on their branches, which whipped wildly, and their trunks grew taller piece by piece. The Treeman troops had officially bared their fangs. A batch of forest guardians, meticulously created by Tree Demon Granny, was also ready and waiting. Though the Treeman could grow stronger through battle, their numbers were a mere trifle compared to the monster tide, and even with their capability of battle-nourished growth, basic logic had to be considered. They couldn't withstand so fierce a wave. They were likely to be torn apart and devoured by the relentless onslaught of monsters before they had the chance to transform the absorbed nutrients. Yuan was of course aware of this too. He had been preparing. Setting up the altar, casting spells. He stood on the city wall, now entered into the undead template, drawing upon Duolas energy. Borrowing legendary power with a mortal's body had its limitations, far from reaching 80% effectiveness, but at this moment he could also be deemed a half-step legend. A true half-step legend. One of the shortcuts to breaking through to legend, as long as part of the body enters the legendary realm, the Lord's own chances of advancing will greatly increase. Yuan did not intend to join the battle himself. Energy surged within him, as if it would burst his body apart. Around him hovered hundreds of beautiful soul crystals, many of which were now dimmed, their energy fully drawn out. He held an excellence-grade staff, lifting it high into the sky. The remaining soul crystals around him shattered completely. "Rise again, my undead!" At the same moment, far within the fortress, Emperor Deadbone held wailing death, his deep voice echoing between heaven and earth. Energy flowed through him as well. He also borrowed the power of Holy Mountain, drawing the energy of thousands of undead, converging it with the power of a pile of soul crystals around him. All of it, poured into the skill he had been charging for hours. Strategic skill, Death Legion. The last time Deadbone used this skill at full strength was during the last invasion. During the Lord Trial against the monster tribe's attack. Every other time Deadbone used it sparingly, for this strategic skill required Krypton Gold. Back then, Deadbone was still a minor professional level, far from unleashing the full potential of this strategic skill. Now, Emperor Deadbone had a bit of capability. Under the bolstering of being a 4th order peak, with several hundred times his backup energy, and the epic 3-star rank, the silent undead began to revive upon the earth. Ghastly light spread over the land. Bleached bones broke through the soil, skeletons crawled out from beneath the ground. Then came the 2nd, the 20th, the 200th, the 2000th, the 20,000th. Skeleton soldiers, ghosts, ghouls, abominations, death knights, and various other undead rose from underground or were shaped from the dark mist, appearing in the world. The monsters were coming like a flood from all directions. But the resurrecting undead were also like a flood, showing the world what a true calamity was. Chapter 325, The Generals of Yuan. My goodness, what is that? I even saw a dozen or so bone dragons. This vitality force, is it the undead? In the past, the undead were the enemies of the majority of living creatures. Both the Elf Empire and the Bright Empire had once carried out campaigns against the undead. However, time had changed, and later, under the threat of corruption and monsters, the undead were also categorized as broadly living creatures. Since Taili was not born in the age of the Elf Empire, she didn't particularly like the undead, but she also didn't have an inherent disgust for them, however. If this force is the undead, then what about the treemen? She didn't understand. Below Wolfhead Mountain, 2 black tides quickly collided. Although the number of undead still couldn't compare with the monster tide, there was now enough to hold their own against them. The monsters' eyes were filled with blood-red fury, unafraid of death, but the undead were even more vicious and fearless. Even if their bodies were torn in half, even if only a head remained, they would still leap up and bite into the monsters. In the monster impersonation contest, the monsters could only take 2nd place. There were abominations that resembled meatballs, rolling into the midst of the monsters. Their thick layers of fat had been chopped open, arms with hooked hands broken off, chewed up and swallowed by the monsters. More and more monsters pounced and bit into them, leaving the abominations almost unable to move. They felt no fear, no pain, they merely opened their gaping mouths wide, splitting up to their ears, emitting a terrifying, ghastly laugh. The next moment, boom! The abominations exploded, their violent energy tearing apart the monsters clinging to them, and a deluge of highly corrosive acid, like a curtain of rain, enveloped the surroundings. For a time, sizzling sounds were incessant, as one monster after another, howling, rolled on the ground in agony, slowly perishing. Wise wolfmen, relying on their exceptional combat power, plowed into the undead tide. They often sliced the skeleton generals in their path into 2 with a single cut, but suddenly, their legs were caught. Multiple bisected skeletons and ghouls clung tightly to them, and in front of them, more undead charged. Between fighting to the death and temporary retreat, the wise wolfman hesitated. With wisdom came more fear, as well as the desire to live. The surrounding undead, regardless of being low or high order, were all fearlessly aggressive, all rushing forward with the intent to trade life for life. Is this reasonable? Shouldn't living creatures be afraid of us? Before his consciousness sunk into darkness, the wise wolfman's mind was still adrift with thoughts he couldn't understand. In comparison to the entire monster tide, the number of undead was actually much smaller. This time, using the Legion of Death, Yuan and Deadbone had focused on quantity. Most of the summoned undead were 1st and 2nd order, even the dozen or so very conspicuous bone dragons were merely 3rd order. But the undead didn't need to face the entire monster tide simultaneously, they backed against Wolfhead Mountain, with their front lines bordering the advancing edge of the monster tide, entangling and battling. The entire battlefield turned into a meat grinder. Within the undead tide, there were also a few but huge figures that stood out conspicuously due to their size. Forest Guardians. Forest Guardians from Nature's faction were actually fighting alongside skeletons and ghouls. In centuries past, this would have left countless people dumbfounded. Unfortunately, the monsters didn't care about such distinctions. To them, treemen and skeletons were all the same. Besides the monsters, the watchers were few and far between. The combination of the undead tide and forest guardians firmly resisted the impact of the monster tide. And atop Wolf Head Mountain, the prismatic light dome formed by mirror surfaces was still bright, fending off some of the long-range attacks coming from afar. Within the light dome, a succession of arrows and energy beams flew out, bombarding the high-order monsters that revealed themselves within the monster tide. At this time, when the monster tide couldn't break through the defense line, the various siege weapons on the mountain played an exaggeratedly lethal role. Previously, the commander of Fang of the Jackal Wolf didn't care about these defensive weapons, because in just a few hundred seconds, the tide would have surged up Wolf Head Mountain. Then, their controlled minions would destroy the delicate yet fragile weapons of the Vitality Force entirely. A few hundred seconds, no matter how powerful these defensive weapons were, they wouldn't be able to kill too many lesser monsters. But now, the undead tide and forest guardians had seized the momentum of the advancing tide, while atop Wolf Head Mountain various long-range weapons continued to bombard. If this side's Vitality Force had sufficient ammunition, they might even be able to gradually eradicate the ordinary monsters outside Wolf Head Mountain. Yuan naturally had plenty of ammunition. The energy well had been built at the domain's headquarters and didn't have much surplus capacity, but Lord Shepherd had directly prepared an energy reserve of over 1,500 soul crystals. Because the Thunder Flame cannons couldn't be charged with soul crystals and because of time constraints, the amount of ammunition Master Li's team could produce was limited, so Yuan purchased several hundred crates of Thunder Flame cannon ammunition through the secret realm. After all, it was a fairly common war weapon in Taishan, and ammunition of this type could be bought to some extent. If it hadn't been for the urgency of time, Yuan would have prepared a few thousand crates. The last thing he lacked was ammunition. However, he didn't show any signs of relief. The monster tide is just the first wave of Fang of the Jackal Wolf's offensive. A formidable overlord power couldn't possibly only have such methods. The Fang of the Jackal Wolf indeed had more than just these tactics. Soon. Bang! 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 The earth trembled more violently, as one immense creature after another emerged from the depths of the monster wave. These were creatures resembling enlarged werewolves, only these giant werewolves had bright blood-red fur as if they had just been fished out of a blood pond. Their trunks, arms, and other parts seemed to have living flesh beneath the fur, slowly writhing in a way that struck fear into the hearts of those who saw it. This was just the beginning. As these giant werewolves emerged, other monsters hurled themselves at the giant werewolves. The monsters clung to the enlarging werewolves, their flesh quickly dissolving and merging into the bodies of the enlarging werewolves. And these enlarging werewolves, their flesh moving ever more rapidly, grew even larger as their massive bodies expanded and their stature soared by the meter. In the blink of an eye, a war monster that was several dozen meters tall and barely resembled a werewolf appeared. The war monsters stood at least 30 meters in height, the tallest towering over 70 meters. Some of the war monsters grew several twisting giant arms from their backs. Others had tentacles dancing wildly around them, shredding any ordinary monster that stood in their way. And there was one war monster that sprouted blood-colored vertical pupils all over the front of its body. Hundreds of pupils opened, and wherever they gazed, countless undead monsters fell into disorder and began slaughtering each other. These war monsters charged straight into the midst of the undead tide, advancing step by step. The undead, even high-order abominations or bone dragons, were powerless to stop the advance of the war monsters. Whoosh! Arrows copied from exploding arrows, shot from tricky angles, pierced into the war monsters' eye sockets and shattered them violently. Plumes of dust arose. The giant heads of the war monsters were blown off halfway. However, such seemingly fatal injuries appeared to have little effect on the war monsters, which continued their march. In the shattered heads, flesh buds moved and intertwined at breakneck speed, regrowing. In just a few seconds, the entire heads of the war monsters had restored to their original state. Atop Wolf Head Mountain, arrow towers, thunder flame cannons, and other weapons continued to pour out their firepower, but similarly struggled to kill these war monsters with huge bodies and formidable regenerative abilities. In the face of the continuous bombardment from thunder flame cannons, these war monsters even evolved. Flesh proliferated on their arms, quickly forming thick flesh shields. The war monsters holding the shields were steadily advancing. In the distance, the elves who witnessed all this through their sentinel war eagles couldn't help but lament. Even though this force is already strong, such an offensive seems almost unsolvable. The undead simply couldn't hold them back. The treemen could block them, but not as rapidly as these war monsters. These war monsters were mainly of third order or fourth order, but on a battlefield like this, their impact was enormous. A fourth-order strongman, given enough time, could kill a third-order war monster, but they couldn't stop them through direct confrontation. We giants are not perturbed by these war monsters, but they couldn't hold back the surging monster wave and would be outright overwhelmed. And this force, while able to withstand the tide and repel distant bombardments, couldn't stop the advance of the war monsters. If they could do it all over again, would an alliance between them of Giant Stone Ridge and this vitality force be able to resist the onslaught of the Overlord? Alas, there are no what-ifs. War monsters can be stopped not only by size, if a high-profile fighter joins the fray, tearing through the bodies of the monsters in a short time, and shattering their cores, they can be eliminated in one fell swoop. However, ordinary fourth-order strongmen find this difficult to achieve. Elf Taily pondered. Even as a fourth-order limit strong woman, she could only slay third-order war monsters quickly. She was capable of killing fourth-order war monsters, but doing so swiftly presented significant risks. She could even be gravely injured with a moment's carelessness. To kill a fourth-order war monster quickly and with relative assurance required a super strongman beyond the fourth-order limit to step in. But such super strong fighters were few within her natural garden. Just one or two. As she pondered, a thunderous dragon roar erupted in the distance from atop Wolf Head Mountain. A far more colossal and majestic figure than a bone dragon, enveloped in a chill of icy death, suddenly descended. Its dragon breath instantly froze and shattered countless monsters. It slammed into a war monster, its claws wreathed in black mist, while countless bones pierced out of the ground, grappling the colossal fleshy beast. Sario's dragon form resonated, and its mist-shrouded giant claws savagely tore through the monster. It cast a death stare upon the core of the monster's body, now exposed. Crack! The flesh core splintered apart. The fleshy giant monster, previously burgeoning with proliferating flesh, now rapidly rotted and softened, leaving nothing but a lifeless mound of decay, quickly dissipating. Yes, an epic life frost giant dragon. The elves' eyes widened in awe. The giant's huge eyes bulged. They quickly turned their gaze elsewhere. There was a red giant dragon rampaging around, pinning down a huge monster with her claws and dragging it over 100 meters before spewing forth extreme orange-red flames from her mouth. Yes, an epic life red dragon. In the distance. On the other side of the mountain. In the name of the fearless giant mountain god ranking, annihilate the enemy. Enshrouded in dazzling golden light, larger than any war monster, a golden giant spirit god wielding a spear as tall as the pillars of heaven, swept forth. The flesh monster's body was blasted apart, its blood core destroyed with it. Elves and giants simultaneously hissed in awe, having made a significant contribution to reducing the pollution in the world. On the battlefield, apart from these three exceptional warriors, there were several treemen with exceptionally large bodies, who easily intercepted and restrained the war monsters with their branches. There were also other powerful beings working together to kill and annihilate one war machine after another. The one with the highest kill count was the frost giant dragon. In just a short while, it had slain 4 war machines, including a 4-order. After all, it was a dragon. The frost giant dragon itself was an exceptional high-ranking being, possessing a massive body and formidable strength, which made it more than suitable to combat these equally enormous war monsters. Ha 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 ha! I truly am invincible. Who else is there? Who else? Isn't there anyone who can fight? Before the word else could be fully voiced, suddenly, a ghostly light flew out from the waves of monsters nearby, landing on Sario. Spell, advanced slow. Spell, confusion. Spell, wing lock. 3 4-order magic-based monsters launched their attacks simultaneously. Sario felt his entire body become incredibly sluggish, his wings weighed down with heavy shackles, and despite his struggle, his body still felt somewhat powerless. At that moment, a chieftain-level monster struck, ripping his wings apart. Sario fell to the ground. High-order monsters revealed themselves all around. This was a trap. A trap designed for top-tier warriors. If the top-tier warriors did not intervene, the war monsters would slowly advance, providing more space for the monster tide. If the top-tier warriors intervened, the high-order monsters lying in ambush all around would strike at the right moment with a fatal blow. This was the Overlord Power's coordinated footwork tactic. Even the legendary realm warriors couldn't save the multiple strong beings trapped in the encirclement at the same time. Boss, save me! At the brink of death, Sario's dragon roar shook the heavens. But Deadbone wasn't there. Deadbone was not present, but the fallback plan arranged by Lord Shepherd was. 3-4 Order Jackal Wolves priests' bodies exploded in succession. Not a single bone fragment was left behind, with only the after-image of Yuda flickering between heaven and earth. Yuda! Brother Yuda! Big brother Yuda! Save me! Without needing another word, Yuda had already taken action. He only had to slightly release the physical shackles to surpass the limits of the 4 Order. A casual punch. The head of the 4 Order Jackal Wolf leader caved inwards and burst with a pop. A serious punch. The sword blade held by the 4 Order Jackal Wolf chieftain shattered. His eyes bulged as he looked down to find his chest pierced through, with a spreading white airwave extending 300 meters behind him. The airwave scoured the ground, blasting out a long trench. Elsewhere, Xi Lu also found himself in crisis, his scale armor shattered and his dragon form scarred and battered. Suddenly. Ding ding ding! Ding ding ding! 1, 2, 3, the high-ranked jackal wolves around froze in place. Art of illusory sound. A wolfman sorcerer's eyes narrowed, don't panic. We outnumber her, a single illusion technique won't affect us for long. But when did you start having the illusion that you'd been hit by only one illusion technique? And when did you start having the illusion that you'd just been affected by an illusion technique? The shades of ghost market flitted in and out of visibility, and one ghost after another's eyes burst into light. Xi Lu howled, it's time for my hunt to begin. In the name of the fearless giant mountain god ranking. A golden giant spirit shadow, even more dazzling and martial than before, appeared behind Liu Lu. Together with him, he raised his spear. Sweeping. One after another, high-order monsters were flung into the air, blood spraying mid-flight, several dying on the spot. Boom! The world of trees spread outwards. Thick and resilient roots broke through the soil and coiled around the bodies of the war monsters, penetrating their flesh and blood. The monsters' flesh grew and healed. But the roots were faster at extracting their nutrition. The flesh monsters gradually withered. As the world of trees rapidly expanded and thrived, at its lush center, a towering tree, so vast it seemed to reach the heavens, began to stretch its increasingly enormous body. Within its trunk, a wise old face slowly surfaced. In the blink of an eye, high-order monsters lurking around the war machines had turned from hunters into prey. The wise wolfman looked at the massive, invincible, and terrifying figures before him, feeling a seed of fear planting deep within, rapidly taking root and sprouting. Elves Taili and giant Jiang'er's eyes were wide with astonishment. In their view were supremely powerful beings of different races, each absurdly strong. These mighty warriors had a common title. They were known as the Yuan Division. Chapter 326, The Mortal Body Against Legend. This is basic operation. The battlefield outside Wolf Head Mountain was like a meat grinder, annihilating everything that fell into it. The Yuan Division was strong, with a rough count revealing 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 elite warriors. In an instant, they had killed 20 or 30 high-order intelligent monsters. However, the fang of the Jackal Wolf's monster wave was the combined strength of several large monster tribes. Originally, when Yuan territory set out to subdue the first Jackal Man tribe, they encountered a considerable number of strong opponents. Just the chieftains alone. Comparable to the Fourth Order peak, the limit of the wisdom monsters. Numbered several. After Yuda and others leveraged the advantage of countering the ambush to instantly kill dozens of strong men, even more high-order monsters swarmed in from all directions. There were also a few war machines, 3 or 4, 7 or 8, merged together, forming even larger blood-flesh amalgamated monsters. These blood-flesh amalgamated monsters, due to their overly large and bloated bodies, moved somewhat clumsily, but what they exchanged for this were vast, marsh-like energies and an oppressive force so immense it was suffocating. On some of the blood-flesh amalgamated monsters, there grew a dozen long arms composed of countless segmented limbs. The arms lashed like whips, and when the giant hands struck down, the ground was immediately shattered. Xi Lu dared not take on the blood-flesh amalgamated monster's bombardment directly. Facing the colossal beast that had grown several to a dozen times in size, she was somewhat at a loss. Her burst of output was not enough. The illusion techniques of Hong Yi had little effect on such a being, which already possessed hundreds or even thousands of chaotic consciousnesses. Meanwhile, high-order intelligent monsters prowled the vicinity, launching sneak attacks from time to time, restricting their combat space. Caught in a fierce battle against such formidable opponents, Xi Lu and Hong Yi struggled. However, even so, any wisdom monster that showed the slightest lapse was quickly taken down by their attacks. So strong, so awesome, so impressive. The elf Taili's eyes glittered. Any 2 fourth-order strongmen trapped in such a perilous situation would have long since been overwhelmed and perished, but although they were surrounded, it was as though they, with their combined might, had encircled all the high-order monsters. No, the impressive one is that unmatched warlord clad in black armor. The giant Jiang'er fixed his gaze on the battlefield where Liu Lu was fighting. Dozens of high-order monsters surrounded him, but he pressed forward step by step. His golden aura obliterated legions, so much so that the high-order monsters retreated in terror, step by step. He stood alone, making thousands fear. This is the true definition of an unmatched fierce general, the real macho man. As the giant spoke, he saw on another part of the battlefield high-order monsters burst one after another, blown to pieces by someone's sheer force. The crimson figure darting across the battlefield seemed never to need a second punch against any foe. Indeed, Yuta did not need a second punch. Aside from the blood-flesh amalgamated monsters, no fourth-order boss could withstand his strikes. The large-bodied amalgamated monsters could never catch up to his speed. He didn't strike at the amalgamated monsters. This was the Lord's tactic. Firstly, to him, the amalgamated monsters were so cumbersome as to be harmless. Even if he happened to be hit by one, his physical toughness meant he would, at most, suffer a minor injury. He had a high margin for error. He could shatter the dozens or hundreds of meters tall blood-flesh amalgamated monsters if he wanted, having the strength to do so, but that would require breaking more physical shackles and unleashing the truly serious blow of the Dragon God Fist. It wasn't worth it. Better to prolong the duration of his burst state and kill as many high-order monsters as possible. This was the Lord's strategy. Several high-order battlefields were at a stalemate. A strike team composed of chieftain-level monsters, engulfed in a hazy black fog, had somehow quietly arrived atop Wolf Head Mountain. With the Jackal Man chieftain holding a high-order breaking boundary stone, they aimed to shatter the 1,000-prism large reflection in one fell swoop. The 1,000-prism large reflection was a large-scale magic, not an enchantment, but its power was indeed similar and could be affected and destroyed by a breaking boundary stone. The Fang of the Jackal Wolf strike team had more than one breaking boundary stone with them. If their tactics were successful, even if Yuan immediately deployed a second 1,000-prism large reflection, it would still be punctured and torn apart. However, the enemy's movements could not escape the observation of the Eye of Heaven, and the Life Star was buzzing with alarm. Ilo stood on the cliffside, overlooking the unwelcome arrivals. This way is off limits, you know. The Jackal Man chieftain looked ahead at the seemingly delicate and weak pink-haired human girl, his expression one of solemn caution. He couldn't afford not to be cautious. The mighty generals of the Vitality Force displayed such formidable power that it was frightening. They had tried their best to bog down those few overpowering generals and carry out their plans for a surprise attack and destruction. Could it be that this side's Vitality Force still had an overpowering general yet to act? Or perhaps, was this person in front of them a being from the legendary realm who presided over this Vitality Force? If it was the latter, they would charge without hesitation, as it was a command engraved in their souls. If they could draw out the legendary being of the Vitality Force to act first, their sacrifice would be wholly justified. Despite that, the chieftain didn't want to be sacrificed at all. He still aspired to step into the legendary realm, to become the ruler of that force. Your Excellency, which general might you be? General? No, I'm just a mere civil servant, weak, helpless, and pitiful. Ilo truly lacked the aura of a general. In the months she had been in Tianyuan territory, she had dealt with official duties day and night, immersing herself in documents and literature. She wore black-framed glasses used for gathering data, and even while standing guard, she did not forget to make the most of her time by reading and learning. What she possessed was the elegant and detached air of scholarly works. The pitch-black array suddenly began to spread, inch by inch, beneath Ilo's feet. Black fog swirled in all directions. Crimson eyes emerged from the mist, opened, and focused intently on the delicate figure. The Jackal Man chieftain cackled with laughter. While this chieftain is creating opportunities for others, what exactly are you waiting for? Ilo's figure shattered suddenly, like a bubble illusion. And around her, on top of various hills, one Ilo after another walked out. All around, 6, 12, 24, 48 starlight law spheres shot out, interweaving to form a large net. She was waiting for her skills. From the moment the Jackal Wolf assault team stepped onto Wolf Head Mountain, she had started to weave the web of fate. She wove for 300 seconds. And with the help of 12 seconds of dialogue, she locked in her targets with precision. Done, and dusted. The star array emerged on the ground. The river of stars covered the azure sky. The domain quietly spread out. When the Jackal Man chieftain came to his senses, he found himself as if bound by heavy restraints, his strength and energy greatly suppressed, while from all around, brilliant beams of light pierced through. The chieftain, out of desperation, took out a flesh core and devoured it on the spot. The next moment his eyes bulged. How can this be? Devouring a flesh core to strengthen oneself and transform into a flesh and blood giant monster carried a very low risk of flesh collapse. And he, just then, ran into this probability. With unbelievable reluctance, he turned into a pool of blood. The battle on the side of Wolf Head Mountain hadn't even begun when it was already over. Ilo adjusted her glasses and reopened her book. The wind fluttered by, blood streamed down, and she stood atop the mountain, calm and natural. As time slowly passed, the battlefield meat grinder continued to mince countless monsters, undead, and forest guardians. Although the vitality force also lost many undead and treemen, the legendary power behind the Jackal Wolf orchestrating this war started to furrow their brows. We can't breach their defenses. It seems the assault teams have failed as well. Stay calm, we have another plan. Wait, what about the second assault team? And the flesh nests we created at the front line, why have they all withered? A legend's eyes widened. The battlefield was chaotic, and their main focus had been on Wolf Head Mountain. But the disappearance of the elite squad and the withering of the flesh nests, all unnoticed. Had they been too focused on Wolf Head Mountain? We can't delay any longer. The King of Black Wings spoke up. At present, they seemed to have the upper hand in the general battlefields, but it was foreseeable that as time went on and the high-order monsters continued to perish, the advantage of the Jackal Wolf in the common battlefields would vanish. They had intended to use the momentum of the common battlefields to pressure the opposing legends. But now, they had become the ones who had to take the initiative. I said long ago, we should have taken action directly, to save time. A legendary realm Jackal Man spoke out. The King of Black Wings shook his head. He was cautious because he knew very well that there were forces within the vitality force far stronger than their Jackal Wolf. But as the probe suggested, the one in front of them was not it. The time had come to make a move and end everything. He declared. The red mist drifting between heaven and earth grew denser. On the eastern side of the battlefield. Boom! Lu repelled the approaching high-order monsters with a strike, severely wounding 3 and killing 1. He took a slight breath. He had been fighting for a long time, facing nothing but high-order strong beings. He had to focus 200% of his spirit and occasionally use the fearless giant mountain god ranking to break through. As the clashes continued, Lu's exhaustion was no small matter. After all, he was only a human, his energy reserves not even matching those of a giant dragon, let alone compared to General Duolai or General Deadbone. Suddenly, an alarm rose in Lu's heart, and a chill surged up, a great terror was targeting him. He paused, raising the fearless spear and shield in front of him, his body emanating a golden radiance that was dazzling to the extreme. Fearless giant mountain god ranking. Will to shield. The golden giant shadow crouched, holding up a protective light that seemed like the dome of the heavens. And in the next moment, crack! 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 Not far away, the sky tore apart, and a giant hand covered in red hair stretched out from the shattered firmament. The hand, massive enough to eclipse the sun, descended towards Lu with an ominous and terrifying force. Before the red-haired giant hand even struck, the surrounding land was already contaminated. A dirty reddish-brown spread all around, as if the earth itself had grown a fluffy red carpet. In the distance, legendary realm. The legend of the Fang of the Jackal Wolf had not only made a move but also resorted to such a tactic as a sneak attack. The giant's pupils contracted, his teeth clenched tightly. That mighty warrior who could summon the golden giant spirit god was indeed formidable, possessing a terrifying strength beyond normal. Yet even so, he was still not of the legendary realm. He was merely at the 4th order limit. Below the legendary, all are ants. No matter how strong a 4th order is, it's still a 4th order. Boom! A tsunami-like storm swept all around. The land, the hills, all collapsed and caved in. Dust filled the air like clusters of grey clouds. Atop the clouds, the red-haired giant hand maintained its pressing gesture, seeming to tremble slightly. Golden lights pierced through the grey clouds. The fearless giant mountain god ranking, lifting a mighty shield, rose slowly. Above it, the red-haired giant hand cracked open, and blood poured out like a river. Giant Jiang'er's eyes widened. At the same time, grey waves surged around Yuta, the waves grey as if they were covered in filth. He sank into them, his hands and feet seemingly bound by layers and layers of chains. When he tried to struggle and shatter these grey waves, he found that they were intangible. It's a domain. Yuta did not understand domains, did not possess a domain, but after all, many a lord had created their own domain in his territory. Often sparring and communicating with them, of course, he would recognize a domain when he saw one. His instincts were also buzzing with warnings. A jackal man sage in a grey overcoat, lifting a bone staff, rose amidst the grey waves with countless gaunt hands reaching up. The hands were dense and numerous, grasping toward Yuta. Whether one had a phobia of clusters or not, such a scene would make anyone's scalp tingle. These hands alone possessed psychic shock and polluting shock abilities, capable of annihilating any energy they encounter and withering everything they touched. Yuta could not see these intricacies. He did not understand these complexities either. But his instincts were alert and reminding him what to do. He followed his instincts. Crack! Crack! Physical shackles, second phase, open. More and more violent energy erupted from his body, turning into a blazing red flame that swirled around him. Physical shackles, third phase, shatter. The red flame surged into the sky. The rampant energy steamed, seeming to warp the surrounding air and space. Yuta's bones clicked and rattled, his muscles writhed like wild pythons, bulging veins stood out gruesomely on his face, contorted by the surging violent energy. He growled. Raged. Roared. The grey waves boiled tumultuously. Only a domain can counter a domain. This is not absolute. The Lord once said that if one's power was overwhelmingly fierce, reaching beyond everything, it could break all laws with brute force. Break. The grey waves were forcefully swept aside. The figure enshrouded in red flame, pushing forward with an unstoppable momentum and radiating the utmost will, charged straight ahead. Punch. Punch. And another punch. The waves blasted apart, forming a gash tens of meters wide and kilometers long. Amidst it, countless withered grey hands froze in place and then crumbled apart. The legendary jackal man sage's pupils suddenly contracted. In his turbid and red eyes, a silhouette wrapped in red flame rapidly enlarged. Dragon God Whirlwind. The crimson giant dragon soared through the sky, tearing through the space, shattering the heavens and the earth, and fiercely penetrating the gaunt body of the jackal man sage. Chapter 327, I have General Duo Lai, capable of slaying legends. Boom! The scorching, steaming red giant dragon slowly dissipated in the heavens and earth, while the shattered space quickly healed. The ground sank, and a deep valley spread hundreds of meters, with any monsters, rocks, and trees in the middle having been reduced to the purest particles under the dragon god whirlwind, returning to the heavens and earth. At the end of the deep gorge stood a gaunt jackal man sage, holding a grey bone staff. His grey bone staff cracked and splintered, and the superior grade cloak he was wearing had also been smashed to pieces. Looking downward, the greater half of the jackal man sage's body had vanished, with only the part above the chest remaining. His chest still heaved with breath, and his pupils constricted tightly. The next moment, swirls of grey smoke enveloped him. The jackal man sage teleported 1,000 meters away, where flesh wriggled and buds of new growth appeared below his chest as he swiftly regenerated. He survived. He survived such a terrifying killing move. But this was nothing to be proud of. The jackal man sage felt only heart palpitations and fear. The human in front of him was only a four-order commander. Just now, he had resisted most of the power of the red giant dragon using his domain and the power of heaven and earth, and only by sacrificing the breaking of 3 treasured items on his body, had he barely managed to save his life. He couldn't imagine how terrifying this human would be if he stepped into the legendary realm. This child must not be spared. Atop Wolf Head Mountain, Yuan felt somewhat regretful. Yuta's attack, after all, contained only pure strength and energy, lacking the attributes of a high-level structure. Since he failed to kill the jackal man sage, there would be no more chances. After all, he was a legend. Yuan felt regret, but it was within his expectations. In the distance, the elf Taili and the giant Jiang'er both experienced a roller coaster of emotions. They were fearful and furious, then they widened their eyes in unspeakable shock. Damn it! My granny! Their emotions fluctuated wildly, revealing many fatal flaws in their stealth. Under ordinary circumstances, these flaws could have been fatal, but at this moment, the energy tide continued to surge around Wolf Head Mountain, and the roar echoed through the heavens and earth, burying the flaws they inadvertently exposed. Or perhaps the legendary realm being of the fang of the jackal wolf had noticed them, but at this moment, those of the legendary realm wouldn't and didn't have the energy to care about these two insignificant ants. They had more important things to do. Around Wolf Head Mountain, the third legendary realm being appeared. Legendary fighter Blade of Chasing Darkness Gu. The red-haired Wolfman, the Jackal Man Sage, and the Blade of Chasing Darkness, three legendary realm beings, acted almost at the same time. Their targets were Lu Lu, Yuta, and Xi Lu along with Hong Yi. Among the three targets, the combination of the Dragon Girl and the female ghost was the weakest. Among the three legends, Blade of Chasing Darkness Gu was the strongest. At least, among the three, Blade of Chasing Darkness's ability for single target and burst output was far superior to the other two. The fang of the Jackal Wolf intended not only to force out the legends of the Vitality Force but also to directly slay these beings of limitless potential. Crack! The space shattered. Blade of Chasing Darkness Gu stepped out of it, and with a light slice of his twin blades, he cut a gap in the underworld ghost market. With a step forward, he moved like a ghost, shooting right in front of Hong Yi. Hong Yi, relying on the power of the ghost market, caught a glimpse of Blade of Chasing Darkness's figure, but she was too late to react. No matter using the ghost market to move and swap positions or to have the surrounding spirits take her place, it was too late. Gonna die, gonna die, gonna die. Oh no, wait, Lord already has arrangements in place, hurry up. Suddenly, the space solidified, and black and white colors spread to the four corners of the heavens and earth. The Jackal Man legend, Blade of Chasing Darkness, remained in the posture of swinging his dagger, but was frozen in place. His eyes bulged wide, revealing an uncontrollable sense of astonishment within his bloodshot pupils. The domain spread out around him. Heavenly and earthly great power began to converge and swarm toward him. The solidified space around him began to crack and creak, subtly suggesting cracks were about to form. However, the Jackal Man legend's pupils shrunk with more horror and dread. The space that had solidified around him began to shift, and with it, his recently dispersed domain, the incoming powers of heaven and earth, and his robust, sturdy body. Even with fierce resistance, he could only delay this process. And the next moment, a figure appeared before him. It was a human girl riding atop a plump slime. Her hair was a light blue, fluttering in the wind. She reached out with her bare hand, growing larger in the eyes of the Jackal Man legend. The rushing heavenly and earthly great power entered the palm of her tender white hand and instantly began to boil. Endless light, endless thunder, and endless heat all blossomed within. The thunder glow shattered the already fragile space, and with it, the Jackal Man legend Blade of Chasing Darkness, who was trapped in the space amber and unable to offer effective resistance. The mantis stalks the cicada, with duo-lie behind. Having the advantage of acting second, the advantage of ambush, and the advantage of a surprise attack, General Duo-lie eliminated a formidable Jackal Man legend with just 2 strikes. Such was the prowess of the newly risen legend, General Duo-lie. He had been lying in wait for a long time. He was ravenous. He couldn't wait to go on a killing spree. Duo-lie held the endless thunder light in his hand, maintaining the posture of having killed the Jackal Man legend, but in the next instant, gigantic wings, dark enough to eclipse the sun, suddenly emerged, enveloping him and the world around in shadow. It ambushed the Blade of Chasing Darkness. Yet this Jackal Man legend, far stronger than the Blade of Chasing Darkness, seemingly had also been lying in wait, anticipating its appearance. The pitch-black wings blocked out the sunlight, and countless visible black light particles converged and surged into them. At the heart of the giant black wings, the King of Black Wings, with the endless energy he had accumulated, delivered a strike powerful enough to tear the azure sky. The land fell silent as a great swathe was devoured. All the monsters in this area were eradicated. Looking down from the sky, one would see a giant paw print covering hundreds of meters, imprinting tens of meters deep into the earth. Within this area, only a ghost, a dragon girl, and half of a human girl remained in existence. The legendary human who rode on the back of the round slime had lost half of her body. And the lost half included her head and upper body. Foolish human legend, actually chose to protect those lowly beings by taking on the brunt of my mighty attack. Otherwise, he might not have been able to slay this human legend in just one strike. How else to say it, living beings are foolish. This kind of foolish act was not new to the King of Black Wings. Decades ago, he had exploited this weakness of living beings to kill a legend stronger than himself at that time, the Feet Herman legend. Thinking of this, the King of Black Wings suddenly uttered an "et." Humans are clearly frail, with their heads and hearts being weak points. But, this human legend whose upper body was obliterated, seems completely unscathed. Those bathed in the glory of flesh, believing in the Tao of flesh as the path to immortality in the legendary realm, couldn't stay alive without their heads either. But this human seems a bit too unreasonable. The King of Black Wings started to have a bad feeling about today's battle, with unexpected occurrences happening time and again. No, this must be an illusion. Definitely. Duo Lai was indeed injured and not lightly. It hurt so much QAQ. If described in percentages, its health had dropped by at least 10%. It was grateful that its slime and girl combination form, which it had developed, had a strong ability to preserve life. And since the big slime's size was far greater than a human girl's, even if the girl's whole body was blasted away, Duo Lai's damage would be at most 20%. Of course, before the battle, it also split off a few little slimes as a life-saving backup. Although Miss Duo is not that tough, when it comes to survival ability, she is ranked first in the entire Tian Yuan. Truly first, and not temporarily first. On its body, the crystal ice state slowly receded, and the mimicked blood vessels and muscles rapidly grew. The robe, fashioned from the ever-changing badge's unique weapon, also repaired itself. In the blink of an eye, the complete General Duo Lai was floating above the sky, locking eyes with the King of Black Wings from afar. The ability to slay a legend first was thanks to General Duo Lai's capability and also due to the Eye of Divine Right's surveillance of this domain. Mu Yuan had arranged for Duo Lai to be near Xi Lu and Hong Yi early on. General Duo Lai, in fact, was prepared for a sneak attack. However, to ensure that she could completely eliminate the Jackal Man legend, she had to withstand some damage. The speed of the King of Black Wings was also quite fast. He was only several kilometers away just moments ago. This grudge, Miss Duo noted it. The battlefield began to shrink, and the fight seemed to have entered its most intense phase. In the distance, a certain scout gaped in awe. Is this a battle of legends? It's too cautious. Whether it's the vitality force or the fang of the Jackal Wolf. Despite being in possession of great force within the legendary realm, they still resorted to ambush and assassination as their means of combat. These legends are strong, yet each is more tenacious than the last. These vitality force entities are not only powerful but also very strategic, completely seeing through the tactics of the fang of the Jackal Wolf, turning the tables to ambush and slay a legend first. However, the Jackal Wolf legends are too crafty, unsatisfied with just one ambush, truly shameless as monster overlords. The King of Black Wings ascended. At the same time, Deadbone led the Undead Legion charging out from the side with Army Soul Resonance. Yuta covered for the other strong beings and elites, retreating to the foot of Wolfhead Mountain. Seeing this, the red-haired Wolfman and the Sage, both legendary, formed a pincer and surrounded Duo Lai. 3 vast domains split the heavens and the earth. 1 against 3? No. 2 other vast domains rose as well. A total of 5 Jackal Man legends stood upon the sky, their presence diffusing like the authority of prison deities. They were not hiding anymore. For once a legendary realm powerhouse opens their domain, covering all directions, no sneak attacks can be made. What follows is a head-on confrontation. And they? The red-haired Wolfman legend, with a domain radius of 2,200 meters. The Sage legend, with a domain radius of 2,300 meters. The other 2 legends, with domain radii of 1,700 meters each. And the strongest amongst them, the King of Black Wings, boasts a domain that spans 4,600 meters. As a senior in the legendary Earth realm, by expanding his domain further, he could even attempt to build a god base and sculpt a god soul, stepping into the legendary soul realm. In front of them, they waited for a while but didn't see a second Vitality Force legend emerge. Just one? Only one legend, what am I even worrying about? Exclaimed the King of Black Wings to himself, feeling embarrassed. After all, the Vitality Force legend before him was not just one, and the radius of this legend's domain was merely 1,700 meters. This must be a young legend who had stepped into the legendary realm less than 30 years ago. Although this legend was somewhat unusual, but those who can step into the legendary realm, none of them are ordinary. The King of Black Wings was not careless. One by one, the werewolf legends began to gather the energy of heaven and earth. Surrounded by his domain which was as red as blood, the red-haired wolfman was devouring the energy from all around. The energy from thousands of meters, even tens of thousands of meters away, also converged towards him as he called. Surrounding the jackal man sage, countless emaciated claws emerged, and a grey river surged, water elemental particles from 10,000 meters away all swarmed toward him. Werewolf Legend Bing and Werewolf Legend Ding were also gathering energy at the same time. Lastly, the King of Black Wings. As his wings spread, nightfall descended upon this piece of heaven and earth. Endless particles of the dark element formed rivers of energy and flowed into his domain. Each of these werewolf legends specialized in controlling different particles of heaven and earth, yet their coordination was so skillful that they did not interfere with one another and even subtly sealed and controlled the energy of the four directions. In the confrontation of the legendary realm, it was either domain or the power of heaven and earth. Now, they were each controlling elemental particles, forming a net around them, and they could even make the encircled enemy unable to control much of the power of heaven and earth. A legend who cannot control the power of heaven and earth is no different from a fish on a chopping board. At this time, under the impact and pressure of surrounding domains, Duolas black and white domain was already making cracking sounds. It was not alarmed, nor annoyed. It merely stood on devouring the giant python, gazing into the distance. Red glow vibrant, grey river surging, black fog boundless, thunder roaring, flames blazing. It spread its arms, and the ever-changing badge transformed into a staff in its hand. Fire, thunder, wind, ice, water, darkness, light. Countless elemental particles in the world emerged within its field of view. These particles frolicked, very affectionate, circling and guarding around it. Even the elements like darkness, light and water, which Duolai was not good at, could still be clearly felt and touched by it. This piece of heaven and earth wanted to resonate with it. It took a deep breath. Breath. Inhale. 1 kilometer. 2 kilometers. 4 kilometers. 10 kilometers. 20 kilometers. 40 kilometers. The elemental particles in the vast and immense heaven and earth began to converge. Crackle. To the southwest, the werewolf legend controlling the power of fire was pale-faced. The fire elemental particles he was holding were like wild horses that had broken free. He could not control them as they flew out, arriving beside Duolai and submitting to him. Duolai possessed a variety of talents related to fire and had the great force of devouring. It was the king of fire. The werewolf legend was at best a minor manager. The elemental particles he was controlling gradually dwindled away, and the authority of heaven and earth changed hands, not even 20% remaining. Next came the jackal man controlling the thunder element particles. These two legends were restrained by Duolas' innate advantage. The King of Black Wings and 3 other legends, who were in control of the power of heaven and earth, had not yet lost their control. But before the King of Black Wings had a chance to act, endless light tore through the pitch-black canopy he had cast down. The river of flames, the river of thunder, surged from all sides, impacting the seal of heaven and earth they had jointly established, breaking it into pieces. Even their vast domains, which stretched out to interfere with heaven and earth and touched the 4 corners, seemed dim and colorless under the endless light. Only in the center of the endless light, the figure surrounded by dazzling radiance, shone brightly like a divine being. Chapter 328, This Lord and Admiral, Massacring Indiscriminately. The frontal confrontations in the legendary realm usually involved a confrontation between domains and the power of heaven and earth. Legends, with their domains as the foundation, sit atop the 9 heavens, commanding the power of heaven and earth in all directions, bending it to their will. The range of the power of heaven and earth that a legend can manipulate depends on the size of their domain. According to common theory, the extreme distance a legendary powerhouse could control elemental particles of heaven and earth is 5 times the radius of their own domain. However, this also involves the legendary powerhouse's control strength and willpower, hence, many in the legendary realm are unable to control elemental particles of heaven and earth up to the 5 times limit. But if a legend's domain is shattered, or if they have not expanded their domain, the range of the power of heaven and earth they can control and the power they can unleash are far below the limit state. The domain is core. The power of heaven and earth is an external manifestation. That is also why the rank of legends is usually measured by the size of the domain. But now, the domain of the human girl before them clearly did not exceed the kilometer level, yet she wielded heavenly and earthly great power across tens of thousands of meters. The domain is real. The heavenly and earthly great power is also real. The slender figure stood firm above the clouds, firmly in control of this vast, ferocious, and substantial power of heaven and earth, without the slightest hint of strain. After all, Duo Lai had long been accustomed to controlling an energy several hundred times its own volume, commanding and manipulating these powers of heaven and earth with ease. It felt that it could also, through devouring abilities, widely whale swallow the power of heaven and earth and then transform it for its own use. It's just that, as it had only stepped into the legendary realm for a short time, it had mainly cultivated its domain and spatial power during this period, and had not much developed its other abilities. When Duo Lai absorbed the power of heaven and earth within a range of tens of thousands of meters, its thoughts still floated freely, quite at ease. The King of Black Wings widened his eyes. He had no time to ponder this highly unlegendary scene, only to judge based on his rich experience what needed to be done immediately. We can't keep accumulating power, nor can we wait for our domains to collide slowly. Our control over the power of heaven and earth is far inferior to the opponent. The longer we charge, the less advantage we have. Strike immediately. He conveyed the command instantaneously through some form of spiritual link. The other legends, regardless of what they were thinking, also understood that the King of Black Wings was right. They brazenly made their move. The river of thunder tore through the sky. A huge fire wolf, tens of meters in size, took shape and pounced with a roar. Even deprived of most of the power of heaven and earth by Duo Lai, these two legendary attacks were still strong, capable of obliterating most peak 4 order beings in a single strike. However, the real main force was still the King of Black Wings and the other 3 veteran legends. On the left, a jackal man legend with a blurred face let out a low growl and swung out a fluffy red giant claw. The claw grew larger and larger, over 100 meters long, with scarlet fur that kept growing, spreading, and falling off to drift eerily in all directions. The corruption of heaven and earth around seemed to intensify. Once hit by the red giant claw, a being in the legendary realm would unavoidably get tainted by the filth, sullying their soul. Even just looking directly at it for a bit too long would result in hearing gibberish, seeing hallucinations, and experiencing confused thoughts, among other symptoms. These symptoms, and the symptoms explorers would suffer from prolonged exposure to the disaster moon and the red fog during the red fog disaster moon period, are not exactly the same but essentially identical. They are symptoms of corruption. And the monster power within the legendary realm had begun to be able to borrow, or rather to manifest, the force of corruption lurking within themselves. After all, most pure-blooded monsters were born from corruption. In front of the jackal man sage, countless thin and emaciated hands appeared. He hadn't accumulated enough strength and thus couldn't unleash his strongest, most extreme strike. However, the scale of these emaciated hands he spread still far exceeded those used in the sneak attack on Yuta. The emaciated hands formed a grey ocean, possessing the same corrupt power as the red giant claw. These hands did not surge forward, instead, the palms split open to reveal mouths within. These uncanny mouths chanted a cold, strange incantation along with the jackal man sage, and invisible curses crossed the sky, falling directly upon Duo Lai. Slowness times 500. Binding times 500. Blindness times 500. Weakness times 500. Fatigue times 500. Most of these curses were cast by the emaciated hands, and their individual effects might seem negligible. But when the quantities accumulated to a certain extent, they represented a terrifying qualitative change. The jackal man sage had once used his power of curses to exhaust a legend to death. A legend affected by his slowness curse moved as slow as a 4 order, unable to escape even if they wanted to. In this war, the sage ranked as the second most crucial figure, next only to the King of Black Wings. This kind of tactic seems very worth learning from. In the vastness of heaven and earth, there's still so much for Gu to learn. At a distance, Dead Bone pondered. It commanded the Undead Legion, maintaining a position where it could support Duo Lai at any moment. Meanwhile, a miniaturized Wraith Sacred Mountain materialized behind it, where undead shuffled about within the mountain, changing in accordance with its will. At this moment, within the realm of infinite serpents, Duo Lai's young face was stern. Its domain was expanded, a domain that could ward off and weaken most external attacks. However, Duo Lai's domain was too rudimentary, and as it was up against multiple enemies, the realm of infinite serpents could only weaken limited force. The red giant claw tore through the sky. One by one, the curses fell. And from a distance, several immense black claws of the King of Black Wings seemed to slip into the shadows, appearing around in the blink of an eye, shimmering with multicolored black light, terrifying and ominous. The killing intent had already enveloped layer upon layer. The judgment of the King of Black Wings was not wrong, their blockade was not entirely ineffective. They had, to some extent, interfered with General Duolas' speed in gathering the elemental particles of heaven and earth. However, power of heaven and earth? If it's insufficient, then so be it, the power of legend was not so inconvenient to come by. Over limit swallowing extreme state. Having stepped into the legendary realm, General Duolai, fully prepared, could max out the power of over limit in an instant. In that moment, Duolai transformed into a furnace of heaven and earth, his very being radiating endless light and endless heat. From his delicate, slender body burst forth energy not weaker than the surrounding forces of heaven and earth. No, it was far superior, an even vaster tide of energy than the turbulent flow of heaven and earth. When the energy reached a peak vastness, all skills, techniques, and traits paled in comparison. Like breaking free of chains, Duolai shattered the layered curses and debuffs enveloping him. He unleashed pure yet wild and boundless thunder fire energy, blasting it in all directions. A dazzling, blindingly bright orange-red blazing sun suddenly appeared several kilometers above Wolf Head Mountain. A tangible tidal wave of energy erupted, causing space to crack with audible snaps, spewing visible black fissures. Tens of kilometers away, a steep mountain peak was swept by an energy ripple. Its entire summit exploded, sending numerous stones tumbling down, many reduced to dust in the onslaught of energy. Wolf Head Mountain itself was showered with falling stones like rain, continuously striking the humming, ripple-filled prismatic shield bubble. The endless light and waves continued unabated for a good while before subsiding somewhat. Within the faint afterglow of energy, General Duolai and the King of Black Wings, among other legends, stood facing each other from afar. The blow just now did not give Duolai any advantage. Following that, Duolai engaged the enemy several times within the tide, still without emerging victorious or defeated. Yuan observed the battle situation very clearly through the eye of heaven. After all, Duolai was just one person, and a newly minted legend at that. He might instantaneously eliminate any legend present, except the King of Black Wings, on a one-to-one basis, but in one against many, General Duolai found himself outmatched. The enemies were not mere targets. They also coordinated well, with multiple domains and killing moves tightly locked onto key positions. Duolai, even if he wanted to replicate the hard resistance strategy to swiftly kill a formidable enemy, could not find an opportunity for now. Moreover, with the King of Black Wings fully aware of Duolai's recovery abilities, taking on the enemy's big moves again was very risky and might lead to incurable contamination. Of course, Duolai still had his real trump card held back, not yet used. In the current situation, Duolai's greatest strength was not the power of thunder and fire, but the power of space. With Spatial Devour combined with the Space-Tearing Seal, Yuan was confident that Duolai could instantaneously kill at least 2 legends. No amount of enemy cooperation could withstand it. However, once Duolai revealed his killing moves and the remaining legends focused solely on escape, even General Duolai would find it difficult to keep them within reach. But these legends must not be left alive. Each additional survivor from the King of Black Wings forces means more power for the fang of the Jackal Wolf, which signifies greater future danger for our Tianyuan territory. Round it up, and if they can't keep all these Jackal Man legends here, the future of Tianyuan territory becomes perilous. This won't do. Absolutely not. Deploy Plan B. Duolai received. Plan B was simple and brutal, a 2-pronged pincer move. Lord Shepherd would wield the Staff of Divine Right for long-distance support. He made his move. In the sky north of Wolf Head Mountain, ripples of energy began to spread, followed by an outpour of infinite thunder fire light. Faintly visible were ferocious heads of thunder flame dragons tearing through the fabric of heaven and earth. This was large-scale magic. However, the way of casting was somewhat different from before. At this moment, Yuan himself stood at the control hub of the Staff of Divine Right, his hands pressed tightly against the golden column in front of him. His spirit, consciousness, and energy momentarily merged with the Staff of Divine Right as one. Energy circulated through his body like a roaring river, emitting a thunderous noise. His skin cracked slightly, a result of internal energy too vast to be contained, exceeding the limit his body could bear. After all, he had loaded the Duo Lai template. Even though far from reaching 80% of Duo Lai's strength, he wielded an indescribable great force. In this half-step legend realm, Mu Yuan's light of will shone brightly, and with the aid of the Staff of Divine Right, an epic architecture, he managed simple manipulation and adjustments of the large-scale magic targeting the designated area. He restricted some of the energy output and did his utmost to lock down the range affected by this legendary super magic. After all, Wolf Head Mountain was right beside them. This control had its benefits, extending the duration of the large-scale magic to a certain extent, akin to slowly throwing out one of the roaring thunder flame dragons at a time. He could also interrupt the magic's output if necessary. A few seconds earlier, the King of Black Wings was also frowning deeply. If they couldn't take down this human legend, it amounted to a grand strategic failure. Could the rulers of the Jackal Wolf region, embarking on a campaign against an obscure vitality force, really end in defeat? Was that reasonable? Logical? It was a laughingstock. No, we still have a chance, he said, casting his eyes toward the distant Wolf Head Mountain. As long as they could shatter this stronghold of vitality force, killing as many creatures as possible, their expedition wouldn't be considered a complete failure. Just a minor one. At least they could offer some explanation to His Majesty. It was when he thought this that the King of Black Wings suddenly looked up, sensing subtle, unusual ripples of energy that had just emerged in the sky. It's Azure Sky Art. Everyone, gather around me. The other legendary beings were also on early alert for this terrifyingly destructive Azure Sky Art. When they saw the dragon head protrude and the dragon claw tear through the sky, they instinctively flashed to the King of Black Wings' side. The King of Black Wings took out a plain and unremarkable black treasure that looked like an earthenware pot. This was the remarkable space urn. In the next moment, an invisible spatial barrier rose up, enveloping the legendary Jackal men completely within it. At that time, they seemed to be in a separate dimensional space, unaffected by any cataclysmic destruction in the outside world. The violent thunder fire dragon plummeted down, shattering the earth and tearing through the sky and space, yet it couldn't even slightly crack the barrier of the space urn. This is the superiority of space, a true spatial barrier. The King of Black Wings wanted to express his joy, but the thought that the vitality force using the Azure Sky Art didn't indicate a last struggle but intended to annihilate them soured his face with bitterness. They might withstand this technique, but in the end, the battle would still be inconclusive. But, do you not feel that this Azure Sky Art is much stronger than we estimated? The Jackal Man Sage suddenly spoke up. They could see the outer world, but could not exert any force from within. Seems like it has become more violent, powerful, and dazzling, doesn't it? If we were outside, I probably couldn't hold on for a few seconds, but no worries, we are inside the space urn now, perfectly safe. Yes, no matter how violent and vast the energy, what's it to us? Could it possibly crack our space urn? Crack! 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 The sound of something cracking abruptly filled the air. Within this independent space that was isolated from external noises, it was exceptionally distinct. The legendary Jackal men mechanically turned their heads only to see, on the invisible spatial barrier, one after another, cracks rapidly spreading outwards like a dense spider web, breaking apart in the next instant. As it shattered, the destructive thunder flame energy that had already enveloped the barrier, and the even more powerful and massive thunder flame dragon waiting in the sky above, came surging down. Under the wild radiance of the thunder flame, one could vaguely make out a spatial crack over 100 meters long, filled with fissures, slowly fading away. General Duo Lai, holding two space-tearing seals, had already retreated, farther and farther back to the foothills of Wolf Head Mountain. He looked up at the sky. The fireworks were spectacular, tracing the shape of dragons in the sky. Thunder Flame Dragon X1. Thunder Flame Dragon X2. Thunder Flame Dragon X6. One after another, 6 single-headed Thunder Flame Dragons emerged from the sky and dove down one after another toward the direction away from Wolf Head Mountain. The ground within a radius of tens of miles shook over and over like being pounded by a pile driver. A tsunami-like energy surge began at the explosion site and rolled out from south to north, swallowing countless monsters, mountains, and rivers until it finally dissipated at a vast river in the north, after depleting most of its strength. Half a day later, a few wisdom monsters escaped into the surrounding mountains, while the tide of creatures encircling Wolf Head Mountain had been almost completely eradicated. The smoke of war gradually settled, leaving behind only the corpses strewn across the land, the countless pits, ravines, and fissures on the ravaged earth, recounting the ferocity of the battle. In the middle of the ravaged land lay an especially conspicuous region. A fierce and deep canyon. On either side of the canyon were steep cliffs of crystallized rock, and in the middle, a pale purple, eerie river snaked its way toward the north, extending beyond the farthest point of sight. This place, in later times, came to be known as Thunder Flame Canyon. Chapter 329, Rewards and Aftertaste. Atop Wolf Head Mountain, the crackling sound of thunder and the unceasing roar of artillery gradually came to a halt. Beneath the mountain was akin to hell. The treeman soldiers, commanded by Tree Demon Granny, were all listless, their branches drooped and many leaves fluttered down from their bodies. The once dense canopies had thinned, swaying feebly in the wind. Around the treemen, the once robust trees that had contributed a great deal of life power were now withered, having realized their worth. In this battle, although the treemen did not shine brilliantly, their overall contribution was significant. The forest line they formed was the most solid defense in front of Wolf Head Mountain. They blocked the majority of the monstrous horde, and when the effects of the Undead Legion skill faded, they took on the main responsibility for resisting the monster tide. From the beginning to the end of the war, they fought fiercely. Unlike Yuta, who was exceptionally outstanding at his peak moment but then lay injured inside Wolf Head Mountain Fortress, becoming a casualty. It's fortunate that, in one fell swoop, we eliminated 6 legends who were controlling the monster waves. Otherwise, this battle would have been much tougher. If the enemy had continued to whittle them down through monster waves and war machines, drawing out a war of attrition, it would have been very painful for them in Tianyuan territory. Over time, the state of commanders like Yuta, Lu Lu, and Xi Lu would inevitably slip, and then they might not be able to dodge an ambush from the werewolf legend. The death of the werewolf legend not only caused many wisdom monsters to flee but also lessened the violence of the monster tide. If the werewolf legend hadn't used spatial treasures for defense, Mu Yuan and Duo Lai wouldn't have been able to cooperate and annihilate all the enemies in one go. In Mu Yuan's plans, Duo Lai's spatial devouring and the Thunder Flame Dragon were to attack from both sides, but they couldn't eliminate all the legendary monsters. After all, the battlefield was not far from Wolf Head Mountain, and he dared not unleash the full power of the Thunder Flame Dragon. He split the 9-headed roaring Thunder Flame Dragon into smaller dragons that bombarded the enemy one by one, and ultimately, he did not deploy the entire power of this super technique. Even so, several peaks of Wolf Head Mountain collapsed, and the impact reached Treeman Forest, which shrank by half. Of course, Mu Yuan still had other trump cards in hand. Early on, when Duo Lai and several werewolf legends were at a stalemate, he began controlling thunder magnetic coil towers to connect with smaller thunder coils around him, accumulating the power of thunder. It just wasn't used. Not having to use it is normal. It's fine not to deploy his trump cards, but not to be without them. If he had to throw out all his trump cards just to eliminate the major threat, it would mean that the entire battle was far from secure. Since Mu Yuan did not continue to cast Thousand Prism Large Reflection in the latter half of the war, some flying monsters broke through the barrage and infiltrated Wolf Head Mountain Fortress, causing some damage to the outer arrow towers, watch towers, and walls. Shattered carcasses lay strewn about, their blood coagulated while wafts of blood and decay emanated from them. Yet, the most intense scent of blood belonged to the soldiers of Tianyuan territory. Lu Lu looked as if he had been fished out from a river of blood, his body covered in the stench of slaughter and his armor caked with chunks of flesh and innards. Other elites who had fought back and forth at the front line also bore similar appearances. There were also some injured, severely injured soldiers. Laney, along with a dozen Holy Light Master sacrifices and Holy Light priests, were busily rushing about to save those critically wounded. Some necromancers held aloft their dead bone staves, casting black smoke like energy to reattach bones to skeletons that were half dead but not yet expired. After all, there were many injured, and to reverse heal them all before reviving would require too much energy. The elites stationed in the watchtowers for long-range shooting, such as those armed with the arrow of Polar Star, were unharmed and not tarnished with blood or minced flesh but could not hide their exhaustion either. This battle was indeed too perilous. Sighed Dead Bone, who hadn't been stained with a single drop of blood and whose condition remained high. It, too, had accumulated a not insignificant list of achievements. Earlier, the flesh nest constructed by Fang of the Jackal Wolf at the front lines was Dead Bone's deed. But with the chaos of the grand battle, Dead Bone captured the flesh nest without the werewolf legend noticing. The battle had ended, yet perhaps not entirely. So concluded Dead Bone. It summoned a reserve undead legion from Wraith Sacred Mountain, dispersing them for vigilance all around. Victory in a great battle is when everyone's guard is at its lowest, and if I were the commander of Fang of the Jackal Wolf, I certainly wouldn't miss such an opportunity. Deadbone spoke with some reason. Even Lord Shepherd felt a lack of safety. While Deadbone patrolled and kept watch, the others were not idle either. The post-war cleanup was a vast undertaking. Then, Lord Shepherd transformed into a transportation base, ferrying troops back and forth with the Lord's seal. He transported a large number of intelligent skeletons, spearmen, and slimes to Wolfhead Mountain, where they, under the guidance of the remaining elite forces, quickly cleaned up the battlefield. First, are we to gather the spoils of war? Asked a crown-bearing slime, Excellence 1 star, with innocent, large eyes, unsure. Duolai crossed his arms and shook his head. No, no, the first thing we do is to collect those high-order monster carcasses, instructed Duolai. You, who have inherited my transportation techniques, it must be done quickly, before the monster carcasses cool. But the defense battle at Wolfhead Mountain had been raging for several hours, and those high-order monsters that had been slain early on were likely already half-cooled, far from fresh. Moreover, the majority of the wisdom monsters around Wolfhead Mountain were those killed at the onset of the war. Thinking of this, Duolai's heart ached, making it hard to breathe. How much soul power had they lost in the end? Damn Fang of the Jackal Wolf, he logged another grudge. Duolai glared at the corpse of the King of Black Wings, which was now reduced to less than half, and thought viciously. Outside Wolfhead Mountain, the corpses of monsters littered the hills and dales, and the soul sand and remnant soul that had been extracted from atop these corpses were also too numerous to count. These treasures shimmered like pure lotuses that had grown out of silt, clean and sanitary, and now in the gradually encroaching darkness, they twinkled with specks of starry white luster, like a beautiful tapestry laid atop hell itself. This tapestry brought relief to the heart. Unfortunately, it made the soldiers who were collecting spoils of war suffer. No, 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 how can exercising the intellect be considered suffering? These new soldiers rarely get a chance to go out on any day, and coming to the foot of Wolfhead Mountain today is exceptionally rare, a great blessing for them indeed. After laboring through half the night, the new soldiers finally managed to collect most of the scattered soul sand. Gathering it all was beyond them. The soul sand was too fragmentary and too minute, and the intelligence of the new soldiers wasn't high enough, so some oversights during collection were inevitable. Some of the veterans, having recovered, also began the work of picking up and gathering. Their tasks were even more burdensome, tasked with cutting off and collecting valuable parts from monster corpses that could serve as materials. Notice, you have obtained 998.6 soul crystals. Notice, you have obtained several ordinary level materials and 68 rare level materials. Notice, you have obtained several ordinary level remnant souls and 366 rare level remnant souls, as well as 3 superior grade remnant souls. The drop rate for remnant souls was actually very low. In the past, many players would complain on forums that after busy work for half a day, they couldn't get even a single ordinary level remnant soul. Players hoping to burst out rare rank remnant souls through defeating monsters found it even more difficult. It depended on the rank of the monsters. Some monsters reached the levels of 3rd Order War Generals or 4 Order Commanders, but if their rank was only rare, then the probability of them dropping rare remnant souls was minuscule. Only the superior grade boss monsters had a much higher probability of bursting out. But regardless of how low the drop rate was, it couldn't withstand the sheer number of the monster tide. The quantity of ordinary level remnant souls was countless, it's just a pity that most of them were goblin or jackal man remnant souls. Even if they are ordinary 3-star level big goblin, giant wolf, bladesman, and such remnant souls, they are hard to sell nowadays. After all, his only channel was the elf courtyard mystery territory. And those who could enter that secret realm were all outstanding lords who would not be interested in ordinary remnant souls. Rare level remnant souls were much easier to sell, and if all were sold, it would at least exchange for more than 1,000 soul crystals. Superior grade remnant souls, as always, were highly sought after treasures, able to be traded for some scarce items. This battle has brought no small gains, but the cost was not low. The fabrication costs of large-scale magic, the consumption of defense buildings, the ammunition loss of fortification weapons, the recovery treatment and equipment loss of each corps' elites, and so on. Yuan territory's total consumption exceeded 800 soul crystals. This was still under the premise that he possessed energy well, resurrection skills, epic healers. For other lords, Fighting such a war could start at an expenditure of at least 2,000 soul crystals. If they also lost some elites or main forces, the lords would be at a considerable loss. But on the other hand, war is not something lords can choose not to fight if they don't want to. What they often fight is a defensive battle. The weakened and pitiful Yuan, facing the bared fangs of Fang of the Jackal Wolf, had no choice but to mount some feeble counterattacks. This battle's true gains were strategic positions, followed by some special loot, and lastly, the soul sand and remnant souls. Found it! Found it! From a distant valley, which was still resonant with the aftertaste of thunder and fire, Duo Lai salvaged several spoils of war. Broken treasure armor, shattered staff, fractured storage ring. Under the devastating impact of the Thunder Flame Dragon, these pieces of superior grade equipment also suffered greatly. But at least, these pieces of equipment could be melted down and remade, right? From 2 or 3 damaged pieces of treasure armor, one could forge a piece of superior grade equipment, couldn't one? The only piece of treasure that hadn't been damaged under the force of destruction was an ordinary-looking black pottery urn. If it weren't for the fact that this pottery urn was fished out from the River of Thunder, it would be easy to overlook on a regular day. It's too ordinary. Not a hint of treasure's luster on it. No. But there's a fluctuation of space power. Duo Lai affirmed. Mu Yuan recalled that half a day ago, the werewolf legend had erected a space barrier. Was it related to this artifact? He pulled out a bunch of identification crystals from his domain and started using them on the black urn. After consuming a total of 31 identification crystals, he finally gleaned some information. Space urn. Rank, Epic. Description, contains the power of space, capable of erecting spatial barriers that isolate everything. More functions are unknown, please explore on your own. This was an epic treasure. Speaking of which, this was the first time Mu Yuan had seen an item of epic level. This thing was far more rare than legendary ones. Mu Yuan gave it a try. The space urn can maintain itself for 30 seconds, enveloping an area of about 30 meters around oneself, and it seems like it has to rest for several hours before it can be activated again. However, this is limited to a fool's way of use. The Jackal Man legend had foolishly injected energy to activate it, but he, Lord Shepherd, was different. He was a man who wielded the power of space, the man with Duo Lai's power of space. With a little exploration, he discovered some tricks. Using the space urn to envelop and wrap oneself could, it seemed, allow one to enter a true different space, completely disappearing from this world. I'll leave this topic to you to research, Duo Lai, I have high hopes for you. Duo Lai gazed back with his clear yet puzzled large eyes. Mu Yuan continued to command his troops, salvaging and collecting the spoils of war, while also deploying the Falcon Squad to investigate the north and pinpoint the location of the monster tribe. The battle at Wolf Head Mountain had come to a complete end, and there were no accidents during the cleanup of the battlefield, but the impact of this battle was just beginning to spread like a storm. Feed Herman Kingdom. The Queen and some of the high-ranking powerhouses waited anxiously. Half a day ago, Fang of the Jackal Wolf had unleashed the monster tide, bearing down on the human fortress city. Of course, they were focused on this battle. They were all horrified by the might of Fang of the Jackal Wolf, whose overwhelming tide seemed desperate. And then what? Why is there nothing more below? What in the world is the scout doing? Whether the human lord's domain can hold or is decimated, there should be some news coming back, right? But Wolf Head Mountain is relatively close to the entrance and exit of Feed Herman Valley, so they dare not venture out carelessly at this time. Finally. Whoosh! 2 Fourth-order Feather Court guards helped each other, flying down through the spatial curtain. They looked very miserable, their bodies scorched, and feathers falling as they landed. Their energy seemed very feeble, giving off the appearance of having just narrowly escaped death. Miserable. Too miserable. They must have gone through indescribable life and death dangers on their mission to gather intelligence, right under the nose of Fang of the Jackal Wolf, which certainly wasn't an easy task. Heroes, both of you are heroes. Many older feathermen cried, vaguely recalling the past. But now wasn't the time for sentimentality, they needed to understand what had happened in the battle. The human lord used a large weapon to blast all the legends of Fang of the Jackal Wolf to death. We weren't fast enough to escape and were slightly affected by the aftermath of the Azure Sky art, and we fainted. We passed out for half a day before finally waking up. The 2 Feet Herman powerhouses were ashamed. They were still terrified when they mentioned it. They went to investigate the battle at Wolf Head Mountain, right? Chapter 330, Top-Tier Human Race Power, Yuan Territory. The morning light was faint, threads of it appearing from the end of the azure sky, piercing through clouds and fog, gradually sprinkling down upon this uneven, scarred earth. Yet even as the dawn broke the night, it couldn't dispel the lingering cold that enveloped the land, a chill that could neither be waved away nor chased off. Here, the blood had already coagulated. The legendary battle of yesterday had torn apart all the clouds and mist in the heavens. After the battle, Duo Lai manipulated the power of heaven and earth to bring forth pouring rain that continuously washed the earth, but it was still unable to cleanse the battlefield outside Wolf Head Mountain. A battlefield like a meat grinder. Outside the battlefield, dozens of kilometers away from Wolf Head Mountain, several elves stepped onto this land with reverence. The leader was the elf Taili, accompanied by 3 Fourth Order peak strong men of high standing from the natural garden. Their first stop was a canyon adjacent to a great river. The canyon walls were steep, with traces of crystallization here and there. But what caught the elves' attention even more was the river flowing through the middle of the canyon. The river water appeared a bizarre blue-purple, with faint arcs of lightning darting across its surface. Within the riverbed, in some areas, blue mingled with red as the water boiled and occasionally erupted with thick pillars of flame, followed by thunderous roars. This spectacular sight meandered up the deep valley and could be seen everywhere. Are you sure this canyon was created by a legendary battle, and not some natural treasure formed by the world itself? I'm not saying I don't believe it, I just can't imagine it with my limited education. That's where you and I differ. If it weren't for Taili using the crystal of image retained to record some scenes, I definitely wouldn't believe it. Who would believe such an outrageous thing? No wonder they call it an epic battle. The 2 elves expressed their disbelief and lack of imagination, yet their faces were filled with expressions akin to pilgrims. They had seen legends and legendary battles before. But that was precisely why they found it exaggerated and unbelievable. Of course, the entity that created Thunder Flame Canyon with such great force was the vitality force remaining in this territory, not a defending legend. However, it was said that at that time, the legend had fought evenly with several Jackal Man legends for a short period, which was already quite astonishing. Anything more would have been unrealistic. The emissary elves continued to advance along Thunder Flame Canyon, occasionally uttering exclamations of awe like wow and amazing. They walked and stopped intermittently, occasionally gazing at the surrounding scars, taking more than half an hour before finally seeing the Wolf Head Mountain Fortress, shrouded in a light mist in the distance. We've finally arrived here, the site of the great battle at Wolf Head Mountain. Next, will we have the chance to behold the face of that great legend? Just the thought fills me with anticipation. Honey, I suggest you keep your expectations in check. We're only 4 Order, how could we be worthy of seeking an audience with a legend, especially one who is deemed legendary even among those in the legendary realm? That's true. After all, we are merely the first emissaries visiting this power. But once we get familiar, perhaps we'll have the chance to meet that great legend, right? The thought is still so exciting. The natural garden, after all, had no understanding of this power. This power also seemed to be related to the undead, so they had to be cautious. Therefore, their mission was merely a tentative contact, far from a formal visit. What diplomatic strategy the natural garden would adopt depended on the information that Taili and the others gathered. After all, vitality forces are not necessarily allies. Some vitality forces have lower limits than the monster overlords. Some vitality forces, like the once Dragon Man Valley, were powerful yet exceedingly arrogant, which the elves did not wish to flatter too eagerly. However, the power of Wolf Head Mountain was different from that of Dragon Man Valley. At its peak, Dragon Man Valley had not achieved any splendid military feats and, due to excessive arrogance, met with a miserable end. The power of Wolf Head Mountain was different. Before them stood an invincible legend who had fought 1 against 5, and the creation of Thunder Flame Canyon that stretched for tens of kilometers was a feat of their great force. Either point inspired the elven powerhouses present. They had no desire to flatter Dragon Man Valley, but this power was, to some extent, worthy of their reverence. They revered strength. Elves might have once been a peaceful race that lived in harmony with the world, but times had changed. The Elf Empire and the Holy Court had fallen, and the surviving elves scraped by, fighting against monstrous creatures that were fierce, bloodthirsty, murderous, and brutal. They too gradually learned how to fight, how to battle, and how to shed blood. Especially for these elven powerhouses who often ventured outside and explored areas ruled by overlords, braving great danger. They understood all too well how important strength was. Taili was petite, with an owl whose head was cocked sideways perched on her shoulder. By her side were 3 other elves. One was older, and 2 were younger. The elder had a goatee and wore a white, loose robe, with an ebony wand that seemed quite heavy in his hand. He had rolled up his sleeves, revealing strong muscles. The 2 younger-looking elves, one with a shiny forehead and one bare-chested with scars, shared the common trait of having exceptionally stout and knotted muscles, with a fierce look in their eyes. Elf Great Martial Monk ×2. Were it not for their distinctive pointed ears, nothing about them resembled traditional elves. But as far as they were concerned, the ability to fight and withstand was the key to the elves' survival. The group no longer concealed their approach and headed towards the base of Wolf Head Mountain. At the same time, within Tianyuan territory, Mu Yuan would hear a pleasant notification chime in his ear at intervals, bringing him joy. Notification: received soldier recruitment order, blue, dot. Notification: received excellence 3-star level remnant soul skeleton general, blue, dot. Notification: received secret realm upgrade stone, special, dot. Notification: received excellence 1-star level remnant soul. Notification: received miracle blueprint, mage tower, green, dot. Notification: received miracle blueprint permanent sniper tower, green, dot. Notification: received miracle blueprint permanent golden fertile soil, green, dot. Notification: received miracle blueprint gravity practice field, blue, dot. Mu Yuan ignored some of the less important notifications, but still reaped a rich harvest. Yesterday, right after the battlefield cleanup had ended and the night was still deep, Mu Yuan took Duolai along with a few powerful beings and immediately launched a night raid on the monster tribe. At that moment, many Tianyuan powerhouses, including Duolai, had not fully recovered, but time was of the essence, and striking at this time could catch the fang of the jackal wolf off guard. Otherwise, waiting another day or 2 would lead to complications in their plans to conquer the large tribes to the north. For instance, running into ambushes or something of the sort. Such an event was not impossible. Thus, Mu Yuan targeted 3 large monster tribes located north of Wolf Head Mountain, ranging from over 200 to 600 kilometers away, the locations of which they had already pinpointed. This move will continue to remove the fang of the jackal wolf's spies and further weaken their power. Secondly, it will yield a wealth of high-order treasures. Keep in mind, the defense battle at Wolf Head Mountain was so tough that they narrowly defeated the powerful enemies, yet the spoils were not substantial. 6 monster legends only contributed 3 excellence-grade remnant souls. This expenditure and gain were utterly disproportionate. But by conquering large tribes and cleansing the polluted blood pond, they could receive valuable gifts from heaven and earth. Moreover, this conquest process would be quite easy as long as they were fast enough. For this reason, Mu Yuan dispatched his own avatar. The avatar didn't take many actions in the defense battle at Wolf Head Mountain. It was the actual body that, due to the integration of the Duolai template and the manipulation of legendary super techniques, was cracked and significantly exhausted, and currently lay in the city lord's mansion enjoying the wounded treatment. He himself could be called the second, third strongest in Tianyuan territory. Mu Yuan used the Lord's Seal to incorporate Deadbone, Daifu, Niu Si and a group of epic juniors. He himself, riding on June, followed Duolai flying swiftly. Any flying monsters that blocked their way were blasted by Duolai from afar before even showing their faces. They arrived at the first target tribe in just a short amount of time, traveling swiftly as lightning. Here, the monsters were much sparser than the Jackal Man No. 1, No. 2 and the Kobold tribes they had previously encountered. High-order intelligent monsters were but a scant dozen. With just a little assistance from Duolai, the group of powerful beings quickly overwhelmed all the monsters in the tribe. They quickly cleansed the polluted blood pond. Due to the urgent timeline and lack of personnel, Mu Yuan's team couldn't thoroughly loot the treasures, materials, and various resources within the tribe. They had to content themselves with a quick search before leaving with the spoils of war. Afterward, they moved from place to place and swiftly erased 3 large monster tribes that had dominated the surrounding areas for years from the map. When Mu Yuan returned to Wolf Head Mountain Fortress, there was not a hint of daylight on the horizon yet. It was then that he had the leisure to check the gains from this expedition. He stored the harvested rare materials and equipment in the warehouse. The high-order treasures gifted by nature were laid out one by one in front of him. Soldier recruitment order can be used to recruit treemen or snow girls. Excellence remnant souls continue to be auctioned in the secret realm. Besides that, there are some brand new treasures. Secret realm upgrade stone, special. Description: can be applied to a secret realm under one's control, enabling it to level up. After upgrading, the secret realm will expand, and there's a chance of developing other special functions. Most secret realms are visited by lords, not owned by them. However, Yuan actually holds a small secret realm, the money-making Black Wasteland. The Black Wasteland is a true secret realm built upon the foundation of Yuan territory, a level 1 secret realm. The secret realm cannot be upgraded simply by investing soul sand like miracle buildings, it requires prolonged nurturing from the territory. The higher the level of the territory, the faster the nurturing of the secret realm. This was the description for the Black Wasteland. Clearly, the level of Yuan territory wasn't high enough, nor had the nurturing time been sufficiently long. After more than half a year, there had been almost no changes to the secret realm of the Black Wasteland. The upgrading stone is another method of upgrading, other than nurturing. Sniper Tower Permanent, green. Description: a defense class building that enables remote troop types stationed in the tower to increase their range by 30%, and reduces the energy consumption of the stationed troops. As the building is upgraded, the amplification ratio can continue to increase. Description: a single tower can accommodate up to 4 combat troop types. Yuan stroked his chin, quite nice indeed, especially since my Yuan territory has such a large number of remote troop types. When troops with already incredibly long attack range like the arrow of Polar Star are stationed in the sniper tower. Just thinking about it was delightful. The sniper tower may not be extremely powerful, but it's definitely practical. Another miracle building was just as useful. Gravity Practice Field, blue. Description: can effectively train the user's physique, making it quicker to improve or break through limits. Note: training buildings and techniques used in combination will yield better results. This type of purely training-focused miracle building isn't really valuable for ordinary territories. Most troop types don't need it, and for those that do, the cost-effectiveness is low. The time and effort spent on training are not worth it compared to absorbing soul sand for upgrades. Moreover, most troops lacking self-awareness don't know how to train. But for powerhouses striving to break through from the 4th order peak to the 4th order limit, this gravity practice field can significantly shorten the time needed for refinement. Of course, the legendary beings can gain even more obvious effects from training their bodies in a gravity room. Yuan collected the blueprints, ready to send them back to the main territory. He was contemplating his next phase of development plans. After the overwhelming victory at Wolf Head Mountain, my Yuan territory should logically be able to fight for a significant amount of development time, but my understanding of Fang of the Jackal Wolf is still too limited to guess what the monster overlord will do next. At this time, he received news that guests had come to visit. The first-rate vitality forces of this region, the Natural Garden and the Giant Stone Ridge. It seems. I have heard slightly about them. Just slightly. After all, they had been a green hand force in this region for just over half a month. The elves and giants weren't here for a formal visit, they just came to get acquainted, to do some simple introductions and exchanges, to get to know each other. On behalf of Yuan territory, Yuan and Duo Lai didn't show up. Instead, Ilo and Lu made an appearance. Although Lord Shepherd was observing everything through the eye of heaven at all times, it didn't take long for Yuan to get a general understanding of Natural Garden and Giant Stone Ridge. These two vitality forces, like the Feet Herman nation, were remnants of an ancient and glorious empire. Unlike the Feet Herman nation, the elves and giants were still exploring the world and would often skirmish with Fang of the Jackal Wolf on a small scale. Their understanding of Fang of the Jackal Wolf went far beyond that of the Feet Herman nation. Fang of the Jackal Wolf indeed has more, stronger legendary beings. However, Fang of the Jackal Wolf also has its main enemies. They often wage war against the forces governed by the fallen god to the north. Before figuring out our details, Fang of the Jackal Wolf will probably not rashly wage war. After all, compared to Duo Lai, the super-legendary being, what truly made Fang of the Jackal Wolf wary was the core-level magic of the 9-headed roaring thunder flame dragon. This was the real deterrent force. They might think that such core-level magic was not available a second time, but they didn't dare to take the risk. They could not afford another loss of multiple legendary beings of that scale. It seems that using core-level magic in the Battle of Wolf Head Mountain was a fluke that had remarkably effective results. Fang of the Jackal Wolf may not launch an all-out war, but sneaky attacks, probes, and other small-scale clashes will definitely not decrease. It's still far from the time to let our guard down. While Mu Yuan was delving deeper into understanding Fang of the Jackal Wolf and the two major forces of Natural Garden and Giant Stone Ridge, the elves and giants were also starting to recognize this emerging force that had made a name for itself in combat. Not an undead force, nor a treeman force, but the human race. It seems to be a miracle territory established by a powerful human called Tian Yuan. Prepare the carriages, it's time for us to make a formal visit to this premier human force, the Tian Yuan territory.